The Blue Sphere of Barrelos. August 1st, 1995. Barrelash, Argentina. The stars above Barrelos shimmered like crystals carved into the black canvas of the Argentine sky. From the cockpit of Flight 674, Captain Jorge Polano tightened his grip on the controls as the city lights appeared below, scattered across the foothills of the Andes like a glowing necklace. It was nearing midnight, and Polano, a veteran commercial pilot for Aerolíneas Argentinas, had guided countless flights through night skies just like this. But tonight wasn't like the others. The Boeing 727 descended steadily toward the airport. Barrelash's runway, nestled between lakes and snow-covered peaks, was notorious for unpredictable wind currents. As Polano began the final approach checklist, the aircraft's navigation lights reflected against low clouds rolling off the mountains. Then the lights flickered. Only for a second. But Polano noticed. The instrument panel blinked off, then back on. He frowned and checked the systems. No warning lights, no alerts. Still, he called down to the tower. Barrelos Tower, this is Flight 674. We're on final approach. Lights just flickered. Please confirm runway status. The voice on the other end sounded tense. Flight 674 standby. Power outage reported at the airport. Generators coming online. Polano leaned forward, scanning the runway ahead. Then his co-pilot spoke sharply. What is that? Polano turned. To the left of the aircraft, perhaps 1,000 feet away and closing fast, was a sphere, bright, blue and pulsing. It was moving parallel to their descent, not climbing, not falling, but keeping pace. Silent. No visible engines, no navigation lights. Just that eerie cobalt glow flickering at the edges like it was surrounded by heat shimmer. The pilots didn't speak. They just watched. The sphere darted closer, then stopped in midair abruptly, as if hitting an invisible wall. And then it fell back, letting the aircraft pass, only to resume pace a moment later. Flight 674. Polano called to the tower. We are being shadowed by an unknown object. Bright blue light, no ID, no transponder, approximately our altitude, about 300 meters off port. The silence that followed was heavy. Then the voice came again, calm but forced. Confirmed, Flight 674. We have visual from the ground. Object observed near your aircraft. Down below at the Barrelos airport, the control tower staff had also seen the strange blue sphere hovering near the runway as the plane approached. What's more, the entire airport had suffered a sudden and unexplained power failure moments before the object appeared. Backup systems had failed to start at first. Only emergency lighting remained. Polano had little choice. He initiated a go-around. As the Boeing 727 climbed away from the airport, the blue sphere stayed at their side. Not aggressive, not evasive, just constant. Then, just as suddenly as it had arrived, it veered upward, accelerating with impossible speed into the upper atmosphere, vanishing into the stars. The aircraft circled back and this time landed safely. The emergency lights guided them in. Once on the runway, Polano, his co-pilot, and several flight attendants all gave matching accounts to airport authorities. At first, the story was kept quiet, but word got out. Local news picked it up within 24 hours, then national outlets. Polano agreed to interviews, calmly retelling what he saw. Always the same story, without exaggeration. It wasn't a plane, he told reporters. It wasn't a weather balloon. It moved with intelligence. It acted with awareness. The Argentine Air Force launched an investigation. They confirmed radar contact with an unknown object at the same time and place of the incident. Civil aviation authorities admitted the airport blackout, but could not explain the timing or the failure of backup systems. Witnesses on the ground, including airport staff and civilians near the runway, gave consistent descriptions: a bright blue orb moving silently and with precision. Perhaps most chilling was the testimony of another pilot. A military crew flying nearby reported seeing the same object in the airspace minutes before Flight 674's encounter. One technician on duty at Barilash Airport described the control panel lights dimming just before the sighting. "It was like everything was draining," he said. "Power, communication, even the radios gave static." The official report stopped short of calling the object a UFO. The term used was unknown aerial phenomenon, but investigators admitted that nothing normal matched the flight behavior or appearance of the object. No satellite or weather balloon was in the area. No civilian or military aircraft registered near Baralos at the time. Weather conditions were clear, with no strange anomalies. Power company officials could not find a reason for the sudden blackout. For Polano, the incident was life-changing. He continued to fly, but the experience changed his view of aviation and the skies. Over the years, he stayed consistent in his account, never seeking money, never changing his story. He later appeared at international UFO conferences, calmly presenting the facts of that night without exaggeration. He was not alone in doing so. Several other crew members eventually spoke up. A flight attendant on board recalled the moment the lights flickered and the subtle fear in the air when passengers sensed something wasn't right. While passengers were not officially told about the encounter at the time, some reported seeing a strange blue light outside their windows. Perhaps most surprising was the cooperation between civilian and military sources in the investigation. The Argentine Air Force acknowledged radar traces matching the timing and path of the blue sphere. No country claimed responsibility. No experimental aircraft was known to operate in that region. Over the years, skeptics have suggested other explanations: electrical phenomena, ball lightning, or optical illusions caused by atmospheric layers. But those theories failed to explain the radar contact, the coordinated movement with the aircraft, and the confirmed sightings from both air and ground. And then, there's the pilot himself. Polano's experience remains one of the most respected UFO reports in Latin America, if not the world. His calmness, professionalism, and refusal to dramatize earned him credibility, even among skeptics. He didn't claim alien contact. He didn't jump to conclusions. He simply reported what he saw. "It was real," he once said in an interview. "Whatever it was flying, and it wasn't one of ours." Decades later, the Barilash case continues to intrigue aviation experts, UFO researchers, and skeptics alike. The photo of the airport control room from that night, lit only by battery-powered lamps, stands as silent evidence of the blackout that accompanied the event. Radar logs from both civilian and military stations confirm the presence of an unregistered object. And that photo, one of the passengers snapped an image as the plane taxied to the terminal after the incident. It shows the snow-covered runway under red emergency lights. In the distance, there's a faint bluish dot in the sky, blurred and partly hidden by fog. Analysts remain divided. Some say it's a trick of light, others aren't so sure. In the end, the Baralos incident may not offer answers, but it offers something else: testimony from trained professionals, recorded radar anomalies, confirmed ground witnesses, and a consistent story that resists easy dismissal. It was a clear night over the Andes. A plane prepared to land, and something watched, silent, glowing, deliberate. Then it vanished, leaving behind questions that remain unanswered to this day. In the Lake Anten sighting, July 31st, 1970, Lake Anten, Sweden. The air was still that evening on the edge of Lake Anten. The lake, a calm stretch of water tucked into the dense forests of Västra Götaland County, reflected the fading light of the Swedish summer sky. It was nearly 10 p.m., but twilight lingered, soft orange hues brushing the treetops, insects buzzing low to the ground, and the faint crackle of a campfire where two friends, Kjell Nielsen and Bengt Svensson, sat by the shore, sipping coffee and watching the gentle ripples of the lake. They were nature lovers, not thrill seekers. Both worked modest jobs in Alingsås, a town just 30 kilometers south, and had made this camping trip an annual tradition, a quiet escape from routine. This night, like so many others, was supposed to be uneventful. But what happened over the next 30 minutes would go on to become one of the most credible and puzzling UFO encounters in Sweden's history. Kjell had just stood up to throw more wood onto the fire when a sudden change in the atmosphere made them both pause. The crickets stopped chirping. The air, once filled with the sounds of night, became silent, unnaturally so. Then came the light. Hovering just above the trees on the opposite shore, a metallic object appeared. It was disc-shaped, maybe 10 meters in diameter, with a dull gray surface that reflected little of the fading daylight. A faint reddish glow pulsed from its underside, lighting up the forest canopy beneath it. Kjell instinctively ducked, while Bengt stood frozen, staring across the lake in disbelief. The object moved slowly at first, gliding with unnatural smoothness. No sound, no visible propulsion. Then it descended, not into the trees, but directly into the water. A splash echoed across the lake, not violent, more like something heavy settling gently into the surface. The object didn't sink immediately. For a few seconds, it floated partly submerged, the top still visible, red glow dimming. Then it vanished below the waterline. Stunned, the two men rushed to the edge of the lake. The water where the object had gone under was bubbling lightly, as if disturbed. A faint smell, ozone, maybe metallic, hung in the air. Kjell looked at Bengt. Neither spoke. There was no frame of reference for what they had just seen. After several minutes of silence, they began talking, trying to make sense of it. It wasn't a helicopter. There was no rotor noise. It wasn't a plane. No wings, no fuselage. It didn't move like anything man-made. They stayed by the lake well past midnight, waiting, but the object never resurfaced. The next day, they packed up and drove back to Alingsås, unsure whether to report the sighting. Eventually, they contacted the police. Their story was met with doubt until an independent witness came forward. A farmer from a nearby property had been tending his animals that night and also saw the strange light descend over the lake. He described the same reddish glow, the silent movement, and the odd splash. His account matched Kjell and Bengt's in detail, including the time. With multiple witnesses, the Swedish military took quiet interest in the case. Within weeks, a group of naval divers arrived at Lake Anten. They didn't issue public statements or confirm their presence to the media, but several locals saw military vehicles near the lake and reported seeing boats with sonar equipment scanning the area. Kjell and Bengt were asked to give formal statements, and they did so willingly. Both underwent separate interviews, and their stories held up under questioning. Investigators noted that neither man had any history of seeking attention, and both seemed genuinely shaken by the experience. Weeks later, rumors spread that divers had found an area of scorched vegetation on the lakebed. Several submerged plants had reportedly been damaged or flash-boiled, suggesting intense heat had been applied. However, no official military report was released, and any physical evidence was classified or quietly removed. What's particularly strange is that Lake Anten has long been the subject of local legends, fishermen speaking in hushed tones about strange lights beneath the surface, or boats that drifted off course for no clear reason. These stories were mostly dismissed as folklore until 1970, when suddenly there was something real. Kjell and Bengt never changed their account. Over the years, they were approached by journalists, UFO researchers, and skeptics. They gave occasional interviews but never sought fame or reward. In 1985, 15 years after the incident, they agreed to take part in a televised documentary about Swedish UFO encounters. Their tone was consistent, serious, factual, and still unsettled. When asked directly whether they believed it was extraterrestrial, Kjell gave a careful answer. "I don't know what it was. I only know what we saw. It wasn't a plane. It wasn't a boat. It wasn't anything I've seen before or since." The documentary renewed interest in the case. Several independent investigators tried to recreate the conditions of that night and confirmed that the witness's viewpoint allowed a clear, unobstructed look at the lake. The line of sight, the angles, and even the weather conditions from official archives all matched the original description. There was no proof the story was made up. In later years, other reports surfaced. Hikers described strange magnetic interference in the same area of the lake. Compasses spun or pointed the wrong way. One local researcher found high radiation readings in a shallow inlet near the suspected impact site. Though no scientific agency officially confirmed those results, skeptics argued that what Kjell and Bengt saw could have been a secret military test or a major misunderstanding. But those theories struggled against the details: the silence of the object, its movement, the behavior of the lake afterward, the supporting witness, and the apparent response by military divers. Today, the story of the Lake Anten sighting remains a mystery. There is no clear conclusion, no confirmed explanation, and no resolution. But for those who've studied it, it stands as one of the strongest multi-witness underwater UFO cases in Scandinavian history. And Lake Anten remains as still and quiet as it was that night. Dark water reflects the northern skies, hiding whatever secrets may lie beneath. Sometimes when mist rolls across the surface and the air grows still, locals glance toward the far shore, not because they expect to see something, but because they remember what did. The Alaska JAL Flight 1628 encounter, November 17, 1986, over Alaska, USA. The sky above Alaska that late afternoon was empty and endless. At 35,000 FT, the world below was buried in white, frozen wilderness stretching past the horizon. Inside the cockpit of Japan Airlines Flight 1628, Captain Kenju Taruchi stared ahead through the windshield. The snow-capped peaks of the Alaska Range faded behind them. The plane, a Boeing 747 cargo freighter, was heavy with electronics cargo bound from Paris to Tokyo, now passing through American airspace en route to Anchorage for refueling. Everything about the flight had been routine. Taruchi, a veteran pilot with over 10,000 hours in the sky, was relaxed. The sunlight slanted low on the horizon, casting a soft golden glow through thin clouds. His crew, co-pilot Takanori Tamafuji and flight engineer Yoshio Takuba, chatted quietly behind him. Then without warning, everything changed. "Captain, look," said Tamafuji, pointing out the left window. Taruchi leaned over. At first, he saw nothing. Then, two pale orbs appeared against the stars, glowing amber and moving at impossible speed. They weren't like any aircraft Taruchi had ever seen. The objects flew alongside the 747, slightly below and ahead. They pulsed with light, shifting in shape, stretching, then shrinking, almost as if alive. Each time the captain blinked, they seemed to move, jerking, sliding in the air without turbulence. He radioed Anchorage Center. This is Japan Air 1628. We have traffic. 2 unidentified objects moving with us at our altitude. The voice on the other end was calm, but surprised. Roger. Japan Air 1628. No traffic in your area. Say again. No known traffic, but we have visual confirmation. 2 objects, Taruchi repeated. Then the objects surged forward, overtaking the 747 and positioning themselves directly in front of it, nearly 500 ft away. A blinding light poured into the cockpit, so bright Taruchi had to shield his eyes. Instruments began to flicker. Static crawled across the radar. Taruchi described them as 2 pairs of lights, like fire coming from thrusters. The crew watched in awe as the objects stayed in formation for several minutes, pulsing with energy before vanishing. But it wasn't over. Moments later, a much larger object appeared behind them, a massive dark shape that dwarfed the 747. Taruchi later compared it to a mothership, describing it as the size of 2 aircraft carriers stacked together. The object did not glow. It was solid, dark, and shaped like a flattened walnut, a massive silhouette against the fading sky. By now, the crew was shaken. Taruchi requested a course change. Anchorage Center, requesting a 15-degree deviation to avoid the object. Permission was granted. The 747 veered off course, but the object followed. Then another request came, descent to flight level 310. Approved. The 747 dropped altitude, but again, the object stayed with them. Air Force radar at Ellendorf AFB and the FAA radar station at Anchorage confirmed a second radar return, a solid object near Flight 1628. At one point, radar technicians reported a primary target close to the 747 with no transponder and no known flight plan. The FAA later admitted that both military and civilian radar picked up strange readings that matched the aircraft's report. Eventually, as the plane neared Anchorage airspace, the object disappeared. Taruchi landed safely. The crew, physically unharmed but shaken, gave immediate debriefings to the FAA and military officials. The story might have stayed hidden, dismissed as another radar blip in secret logs, if not for what happened next. Captain Taruchi, unlike many pilots before him, went public. He gave interviews, described the encounter in detail, and shared drawings of what he had seen. Fluent in English, calm and respectful in manner, Taruchi became the face of one of the most extraordinary UFO events in aviation history. He didn't claim aliens. He didn't make wild theories. He simply described the facts, what he and his crew witnessed, what their instruments recorded, and what radar confirmed. The FAA launched a full investigation. John Callahan, then chief of FAA Accidents and Investigations, was brought in. He reviewed radar tapes, voice recordings, and pilot testimony. What he found disturbed him. There were multiple radar returns from a stationary object, an object with no transponder, no flight path, and behavior that couldn't be explained. Callahan said years later, "It was clear. It wasn't an airplane. We showed the data to the CIA, the FBI, the Air Force. They were all there." Callahan was later told to stay quiet. According to his sworn testimony, the government classified the encounter and buried it, but he saved copies of the data. In the early 2000s, he released the materials publicly and testified at the National Press Club, joining other aviation experts who came forward with similar encounters. To this day, the FAA and NASA do not give a final explanation for the incident. Was it secret military technology, an unknown atmospheric phenomenon, a radar glitch made worse by stress? None of those matched the facts. 3 trained aviation professionals saw the objects with their own eyes. FAA and military radar confirmed a solid object. The flight crew's behavior, Their tone, their requests for evasive action, and their calm professionalism all support the seriousness of the event. This wasn't panic. It wasn't confusion. It was something else. In 1987, after continued media pressure, the FAA reassigned Captain Tarucci to a desk job, citing concerns about his judgment. The decision was criticized by pilots, unions, and the public. Many believed it was punishment for telling the truth. After several years, Tarucci was reinstated and continued flying until retirement. He never changed his story. Over the decades, Flight 1628 has remained a cornerstone of UFO aviation cases, notable not just for its multiple witnesses and radar data, but also for the rare mix of civilian and military confirmation. Very few UFO cases have both aircrew and radar support so closely aligned. Even skeptics struggle with this case, as it defies usual dismissal tactics. No swamp gas, no Venus, no simple atmospheric trick, just a seasoned pilot, a massive unknown object, and a flight that changed the conversation about what really flies in our skies. What made this case so different wasn't the size of the sighting, but its credibility. Kenju Tarucci wasn't a man chasing headlines. He wasn't prone to fantasy. He was, by all accounts, the kind of pilot you'd want in charge when things go wrong. Calm, steady, and focused. And in his eyes, what he saw that night was not a mistake. It was not a misunderstanding. It was real. And it flew alongside him across the frozen silence of Alaska, watched, studied, and then vanished. The Zanfreda abductions. December 6th, 1978. Torriglia, Italy. The Fiat's headlights cut through thick fog curling in the Ligurian mountains, lighting narrow strips of asphalt and frozen stone walls. Midnight was near in the village of Torriglia, and the road to the remote vacation estate known as Villa Casa Nostra was empty. No cars, no sounds, only the hum of the engine and the crunch of tires over ice. Inside the small security patrol car, Pier Fortunato Zanfreda gripped the wheel tighter than usual. He didn't know why, but something felt wrong. Minutes later, he parked and stepped out. His boots sank into damp soil. Flashlights slicing the darkness. The air felt heavy, almost charged. Pressure built in his ears, as if the atmosphere itself were reacting to something unseen. His breath fogged in quick, uneasy bursts as he neared the villa grounds. Then the silence broke. A movement, quick, massive, stirred the hedges. Zanfreda stopped. His light caught something that shouldn't have been there. Towering figures nearly 3 meters tall stood motionless in the bushes. Their skin was scaly and greenish. Their eyes glowed yellow. They wore bulky metallic suits that hissed faintly. Zanfreda's mouth went dry. He reached for his pistol, but before he could draw, a burning white light surrounded him. He screamed. The radio in his car crackled. Zanfreda. "Come in." No response, only static. Then, huge, terrible beings. "They're here." The transmission cut. When the Carabinieri found him an hour later, the patrol car's engine was still running. Zanfreda sat inside, shaking, unable to speak. His eyes were wide with terror. Burn marks scarred his uniform. His pistol was back in its holster, untouched, though he had no memory of putting it there. The official report listed the time as 1:10 a.m. That moment marked the start of one of the most chilling and well-documented alien abduction cases in European history. In the hours that followed, Zanfreda tried to explain what happened. He said he was lifted into a craft by a column of blinding light. Surrounded by huge reptilian beings who spoke telepathically. They said they were from the third galaxy, a planet orbiting Tidy. They had been watching, studying, waiting, and he had been chosen. The media storm came quickly. Italy's major newspapers ran headlines about the terrified security guard who claimed to have met extraterrestrials. Many laughed, but the Carabinieri's report, which was public, spoke of emotional shock, physical evidence, and a serious, consistent account. It was enough to draw the attention of researchers, psychologists, and skeptics. In the weeks that followed, Zanfreda underwent hypnosis sessions with Dr. Mauro Moretti from the International Center of Medical Hypnosis in Milan. These sessions were recorded and studied. Under hypnosis, Zanfreda described multiple abductions, always providing new but consistent details. He spoke of glowing panels, alien machines, and a clear warning. Humans were not ready for contact. The descriptions never changed. The beings were huge, at least 9 ft tall, with rough skin, clawed hands, and glowing eyes. Their technology was far beyond understanding, and yet their tone was clinical, even cold. In one session, Zanfreda broke down in tears, remembering how one creature had placed a clear sphere into his skull. It was meant to monitor him, they said. His role was not just as a witness, but as an unwilling messenger. Even stranger were his repeated disappearances. On several occasions in 1979 and 1980, Zanfreda vanished from his patrol route, only to be found hours later in distant areas, dazed, drenched in sweat, and suffering from memory loss. During one event, other guards reported seeing a strange light shoot into the sky just before Zanfreda's radio went silent. When he was found, he could hardly speak. Investigators documented everything carefully. Soil samples from the first site were compressed and slightly scorched. Semicircular marks in the ground suggested a very heavy object had been there. Villagers reported strange lights in the sky the night of the first abduction. One local, a mechanic named Carlo Rossi, said his dog barked wildly and refused to go near the woods by the villa for days. But the most convincing evidence was Zanfreda himself. He never asked for money, fame, or publicity. He turned down book deals. He refused most media invitations. When he finally appeared on Italian TV in the mid-1980s, it was clear he was uncomfortable. His hands shook, and his eyes darted nervously as he told his story once more. Despite this, his story stayed the same. Journalist Rino Di Stefano, who studied the case for over 10 years, interviewed Zanfreda many times and reviewed police files, hypnosis recordings, and witness statements that supported the story. He became convinced that Zanfreda believed everything he said and had suffered greatly because of it. Stefano published several articles and a book gathering the large amount of documentation behind the case. The public remained divided. Skeptics argued that Zanfreda might have experienced hallucinations or psychological trauma, though thorough mental health checks at the time showed no signs of psychosis or delusion. Others believed his story matched too closely with new reports of alien abductions around the world to be just coincidence. In the small town of Torriglia, where the hills remain quiet and the roads still twist through the mountains, memories of that strange winter night linger. A small plaque near the villa now marks the supposed landing site, placed there not as proof, but as recognition of one man's consistent testimony. Zanfreda, now retired and living quietly, rarely speaks publicly anymore, but he never took back his story. In a rare interview decades later, he said softly, "I didn't want this. I still wish it had never happened, but I can't forget what I saw, and I never will." The case remains open, both literally and figuratively. No one has ever disproved Zanfreda's story, and maybe that is the most unsettling part of all. If what he claimed was true, then we are not alone, and someone or something chose a lone night watchman in a mountain village to remind us of that fact. The USO of Shag Harbor, October 4, 1967. Shag Harbor, Nova Scotia, Canada. The night burst with light. Out over the Atlantic horizon, something shot low across the sky, leaving behind a trail of amber light that glowed like fire. It wasn't a shooting star. It was too slow, too controlled. Drivers slammed their brakes along Highway 3. People stepped outside their homes, shielding their eyes from the blinding glow above. Then came the impact. A flash, a thunderous splash, and silence. What followed would become one of the strangest and best documented UFO cases in Canadian history. A dozen witnesses saw it fall. Police arrived within minutes. The Navy sent divers, and yet, no wreckage, no plane, and no answers were ever found. In the quiet fishing village of Shag Harbor, Nova Scotia, something crashed into the sea on the night of October 4th, 1967. Not even the Canadian government could explain it. The first official call came from 18-year-old Lori Wickens, who was driving with 4 friends when they saw what looked like a low-flying aircraft with flashing lights. The object seemed to come down at an angle before crashing into the dark waters of the harbor. Wickens and his friends immediately pulled over and called the RCMP, convinced they had just seen a plane crash. They weren't the only ones. At least 11 other witnesses phoned in similar reports that night, all describing an unknown object with yellow lights that fell from the sky and floated briefly before sinking under the water. Corporal Ron O'Brien of the RCMP arrived within minutes. By the time he got to the shoreline, several locals had already gathered. They pointed to a glowing object about 800 feet offshore, partly submerged and giving off a soft yellow glow across the waves. O'Brien radioed in an emergency, fearing there were survivors or casualties in a downed aircraft. Fishermen from nearby villages launched their boats into the harbor within the hour. One of them, Captain Harold Dobson, later told reporters that as they got close to the glowing object, it began to fade. Within minutes, it sank below the surface and vanished without a trace. The fishermen found nothing. No oil slick, no floating wreckage, and no bodies. It was as if whatever had gone into the sea had either left or disappeared. By the next morning, the story was everywhere in the local press. UFO sinks in Shag Harbor, read the headlines. At first, reports suggested a downed plane or a military aircraft, but the Canadian military quickly ruled that out. Every commercial and military flight was accounted for. No aircraft were missing, no emergency calls, no distress signals, and no radar signs showed any accident. The Rescue Coordination Center in Halifax launched an official response. The Royal Canadian Navy was sent to the scene, along with divers from Fleet Diving Unit Atlantic. For 3 days, they searched the harbor floor. Using sonar and diving equipment, they scanned a large area of the harbor and nearby waters, looking for wreckage. Nothing was found. On October 6th, just 2 days after the crash, a memo was sent by the Canadian Department of National Defence. It stated, "The object was described as a large object in the sky, about 60 feet long with flashing lights. It was then seen to hit the water and float before disappearing. No aircraft was reported missing. Search efforts failed to locate any object." This memo still exists today, public, official, and a rare example of a government admitting that something unknown entered their airspace and crashed without explanation. But the story didn't end there. In the 1990s, 2 Canadian UFO researchers, Chris Stiles and Don Ledger, dug deeper into the Shag Harbor case. Through interviews with former Navy personnel and access to declassified files, they uncovered claims that the object hadn't simply disappeared, it had moved underwater. According to multiple unnamed sources, the object reportedly traveled beneath the waves, evading sonar at first before being detected again off the coast of Shelburne, Nova Scotia, home to a top-secret American submarine detection base during the Cold War. Some sources claimed the military tracked the USO, unidentified submerged object, for days. At one point, they even believed a second object had joined it. Ships were quietly deployed, the area monitored, but no public announcement was ever made. The Canadian Navy denied the claims, saying only that the original search had found nothing and was closed for lack of results. But Stiles and Ledger weren't convinced. In their book Dark Object, they detailed these interviews and pointed out the unusual effort the military made for a case that officially involved no missing plane and no known threat. One former diver, who stayed anonymous, told Stiles in a private interview that he and his team had been stationed near Shelburne during a quiet but heavily monitored operation after the Shag Harbor incident. He said they were told very little, only to report if they found any submerged objects, though he never claimed to see one himself. Still, he was sure that something was being tracked down there. Yet, hard evidence beyond the first event is still missing. No physical remains have ever been recovered. No sonar records have been released, and no diver has gone on record to confirm an underwater craft. But the quick response, the immediate launch of search and rescue, naval divers, and cooperation between Canadian and American forces suggests authorities took it seriously. Skeptics argued that witnesses likely saw a meteor or re-entering satellite. But meteor experts at the time rejected that idea, pointing out that meteors don't float, don't shine on the surface for minutes, and don't make loud splashes before sinking. These details, reported by multiple independent witnesses, remain central to the mystery. Some have suggested it could have been an experimental military vehicle or a secret re-entry capsule, possibly from the U.S. If true, that might explain the fast military response, the silence from both governments, and the lack of follow-up. But again, no proof of such a craft has ever been found, and the Canadian military denied knowing of any object entering their waters. Today, the Shag Harbor incident remains one of the most reliable and well-documented UFO cases in North America. It is included in official UFO files, cited by Canadian defense records, and often referenced in academic studies of unidentified aerial phenomena. Unlike many UFO stories, it didn't rely on blurry footage, unverified claims, or memories decades later. It was immediate, documented, investigated, and never solved. The town of Shag Harbor embraces its unusual place in history. A small museum sits near the shore where the object went into the water. A monument marks the spot. Every year, visitors gather for a modest UFO festival to remember the mystery. Older locals still talk about that night, the lights, the sound, the object on the water, and how quickly it vanished. But beneath the folklore lies solid, unanswered data. Dozens of witnesses, official reports, divers in the water, military secrecy, a glowing object seen crashing into the sea, and nothing ever found. In a world full of doubtful sightings and hoaxes, the Shag Harbor case stands out for what it truly offers: a real event, a real response, and a total lack of closure. The Tehran dogfight incident. September 19th, 1976. Tehran, Iran. The night skies over Tehran buzzed with tension. It was just past midnight on September 19th, 1976. Civilians in the northern suburbs looked up and froze. A strange, bright object hovered silently above the city. Unnaturally still, extremely bright, and impossible to identify. Some thought it was a helicopter. Others whispered it might be a missile. But it made no sound. And when people tried to use their phones, many landlines had stopped working. At Mehrabad International Airport, calls poured into the control tower from panicked residents. Something was in the sky, too low, too bright, and too silent to be ignored. The Iranian Air Force was alerted, and the decision was quick: scramble fighters. What followed became one of the most astonishing close encounters in military history. Radar locks failed, weapon systems shut down, and experienced pilots were shaken by an object that defied all known physics. Major Parviz Jafari was the second pilot sent that night to intercept the unknown object. A respected officer, he took off in his F-4 Phantom from Cherokee Air Base. The first interceptor, sent 30 minutes earlier, had been forced to retreat when its instruments failed as it neared the target. Now, Jafari was airborne, climbing to 23,000 feet, determined to confront whatever had entered Iranian airspace. As he approached, Jafari radioed the tower. "I have it visually," he reported. "It is a bright object. It is flashing with intense red, green, orange, and blue lights. It is changing shape." His radar operator confirmed the contact. The blip was large, similar in size to a Boeing 707, but the object made no sound and hovered effortlessly in place. Jafari got within 25 nautical miles. Suddenly, a smaller object broke away from the main one and shot straight toward his jet. Instinctively, he tried to fire a missile. Nothing worked. His weapons control panel went dead. So did his radio. The cockpit lights blinked out, leaving him in darkness. He turned away, diving hard, and the smaller object broke off and returned to the larger craft. As Jafari regained control, he saw the original object descend quickly toward the earth, appearing to land softly just outside Tehran. As he circled the area, another object emerged from the craft and zipped around his position at incredible speed. Again, his jet's electronics failed. He pulled away and returned to base, shaken and unable to explain what he had just seen. Meanwhile, civilians on the ground reported the same strange lights. They heard nothing: no engines, no rotors, just silence. When Jafari landed, he was questioned by senior officers and intelligence officials. His jet was inspected. No faults were found. The failures had been temporary, happening only during the encounter. The Iranian Air Force filed a full incident report and sent it to the U.S. Defense Attaché Office in Tehran. That report was then sent to Washington. It wasn't dismissed or ignored. It reached high levels of attention, including the Defense Intelligence Agency, DIA, and the Central Intelligence Agency, CIA. A declassified DIA report from October 1976 describes the event in detail. It confirms that both F-4s experienced radar locks, followed by total electronic failure when approaching the object. It states the glowing craft was seen by both pilots and ground control, and it specifically mentions smaller objects separating from it. The report even stated, "This case is a classic which meets all the criteria for a valid study of the UFO phenomenon. The object was seen by multiple witnesses from different locations, both air and ground." The credibility of many witnesses was high. An experienced Air Force general was a witness, and the object showed extraordinary flight abilities. This happened during the Cold War. Iran was a U.S. ally, and the Shah's military was one of the best funded in the region. The U.S. was deeply invested in Iran's air defense. This wasn't a case of mistaken civilian lights or a pilot's imagination. The U.S. took it seriously. In fact, former NSA and CIA officials have confirmed that this case circulated among top intelligence circles for years. It was referenced in later briefings about unknown aerial threats. The U.S. government never explained the incident. To this day, no known aircraft, foreign or domestic, has been identified as the cause. Theories have been offered, of course. Skeptics suggested a satellite, strange atmospheric effects, or electronic malfunctions, but none explained how two jets lost the same systems at the exact moments of visual and radar contact. Nor did they explain the smaller maneuvering objects or the matching ground reports. Major Jafari, who later became a general, stuck to his story. In interviews decades later, he recalled the encounter clearly. "The object was beyond anything I'd ever seen," he said. "It moved in ways no aircraft ours or theirs could. I thought it was going to destroy me. I wanted to fire and my system shut down." He later testified before the Disclosure Project in 2001, swearing under oath that the object was real, intelligently controlled, and showed technology far beyond anything known. His account never changed. Iranian radar operators from that night also confirmed tracking the object. At one point, radar locked onto a secondary object traveling faster than Mach 3, 3 times the speed of sound. That was faster than nearly all military aircraft of the time and not consistent with any known drone or missile. The reported landing site outside Tehran was inspected by military teams. Some claimed they found scorched ground and strange radiation levels, though no samples or records were ever released. Despite researchers' efforts, most official Iranian files remain classified. But enough pieces have surfaced: witness testimony, the USDIA report, flight logs, and radar data to make the Tun incident one of the most convincing military UFO encounters ever recorded. It checks every box: multiple reliable witnesses, physical effects, instrument failure, radar confirmation, and intelligent control. And yet, it's rarely discussed publicly, buried under decades of secrecy and global tension. Unlike many UFO stories, this one didn't come from a civilian or a fringe believer. It came from a military pilot trusted with national defense, and it was confirmed by the military of not just one, but 2 nations. No one has ever found a simple explanation. Not the Shah's government, not the Americans, not skeptics. In the shadow of history, the Tan dogfight incident remains one of the most chilling reminders that something, not ours, not theirs, shares the skies above. The Coyne helicopter case, October 18, 1973, near Mansfield, Ohio, USA. The night was perfectly clear above northern Ohio, with stars scattered across the autumn sky like powdered sugar over black velvet. From the cockpit of a U.S. Army Reserve UH-1 Huey helicopter, Captain Lawrence Coyne checked his gauges. The green dials glowed steadily. Below, the dark countryside stretched silently as his crew made their routine flight from Columbus to Cleveland. It was just after 10:30 p.m., October 18, 1973. In the back, Specialist John Healy monitored the radio. In the front, Sergeant Robert Yanatsek sat beside Coyne as co-pilot, while Staff Sergeant Arrigo Jezzi manned the left rear seat. They were 2,500 feet above the ground, cruising at a steady pace through military-controlled airspace. And then, the night changed. Janacek spotted a red light to the west, moving rapidly toward them. "Aircraft at Tensao," he called out. Coyne glanced up, expecting a standard navigation beacon from a fixed-wing plane. But this wasn't moving like any aircraft they knew. It was closing in fast. Within seconds, the red light changed direction and began a sharp descent toward the Huey. Coyne took the controls and initiated a dive to avoid a mid-air collision, dropping the helicopter from 2,500 feet to 1,700 feet in less than 30 seconds. But the object mirrored them, altering course, staying locked above. And then it stopped. The red light stabilized just above and in front of the Huey, no longer moving. The men could now clearly see the source, a gray, metallic, cigar-shaped craft nearly as large as a commercial jet, hovering completely still. From its center extended a green light beam, bright, well-defined, and focused directly on their helicopter. They were now inside it. Everything inside the cockpit was filled with an unnatural green glow. The light filled the cabin but cast no shadows. It didn't scatter like a searchlight. It was tight, controlled, directed. Then, their instruments failed. The magnetic compass spun wildly. The radio went silent. The altimeter stopped responding. Even the controls briefly felt unresponsive. The entire crew sat in silence, each man suddenly aware that their training, logic, and assumptions about the world no longer applied. The encounter lasted less than a minute. The object hovered, projected its beam, and then, without a sound, shot off to the west at an impossible speed, disappearing into the horizon in less than a second. When the crew regained their senses, they realized something was wrong. Coyne checked his instruments. Despite descending moments earlier, the helicopter was now climbing, ascending at 1,000 feet per minute without input. It was as if the craft had lifted them. They were now at 3,500 feet, 1,000 feet higher than their original altitude, yet none of them had touched the controls. Coyne leveled the aircraft and called Cleveland Air Traffic Control. Communications had returned. He reported an unidentified object at their location. The FAA logged the call. Meanwhile, back on the ground in Mansfield, multiple civilian witnesses had seen the same thing. A mother driving with her 4 children reported a large object with red and green lights crossing the road above her car before shooting into the sky. A police officer saw a strange light hovering near the treetops. Back at the airfield, the crew landed safely and immediately filed an official report with their commanding officers. The Army didn't dismiss them. In fact, the men were later debriefed by military intelligence. The incident was serious enough that the FAA and NASA both conducted quiet inquiries, but no official explanation was ever offered. What makes the Coyne incident remarkable, beyond the visual confirmation, the electromagnetic interference, and the physical effects on the aircraft, is the credibility of the witnesses. These weren't civilians or enthusiasts. These were trained military pilots, each responsible for flying a multi-ton aircraft with years of experience identifying aerial threats. Their accounts never wavered. Captain Coyne himself, who later received the National Enquirer's Blue Ribbon Panel Award for UFO reporting, vetted by scientists and military officers, not journalists, maintained the same account until his death in 2011. He never sought fame or profit. He described the event soberly, plainly, as a professional who witnessed something he couldn't explain. A decade later, the United Nations invited Coyne to speak at a panel on unexplained aerial phenomena. He calmly recounted the details of that October night, describing the object, its beam, and how the helicopter had mysteriously ascended without input. His presence gave the topic a legitimacy that few other cases ever achieved. Investigators who reviewed the event found no known aircraft operating in the area that could have behaved in such a way. No military exercises, no radar-confirmed traffic, no weather anomalies. The FAA reviewed the flight path and confirmed the altitude gain. Electromagnetic interference matching the compass failure had no conventional source. Skeptics offered a few theories. Maybe the red light was a meteor, but meteors don't hover, nor do they shine beams of green light. Others speculated the object was a refueling plane, but no tanker could stop and hover without sound or lift another aircraft without contact. Moreover, the vertical ascent, the loss of control systems, and the physical behavior of the beam defied explanation. UFO researchers often highlight this case not just because of its witnesses, but because it involved actual interaction, a direct physical influence on a military helicopter. In interviews years later, Jesse recalled how quiet the crew became after the object departed. None of us wanted to speak. We knew what we saw, and none of it made sense. Janacek, in a separate interview, admitted he had trouble sleeping for weeks. "It changed my worldview," he said. "I've never been the same since." As for the green beam, Coyne was clear. It wasn't scanning us. It wasn't searching. It was aimed. They knew exactly where we were. The incident became a key case in both UFO literature and official military briefings on unidentified aerial phenomena. It was one of the few cases included in both American and international reviews of the topic. It has never been debunked. To this day, there is no simple explanation for what Coyne and his crew encountered in the skies over Mansfield that night. The U.S. government has not released any documents contradicting their account. No aircraft or technology then or now matches the description. The Coyne helicopter case remains one of the most credible and chilling close encounters in UFO history. A silent visitor hovered just long enough to be seen, to be felt, and to change 4 men's lives forever. And then it was gone. The Westall School encounter, April 6, 1966, Melbourne, Australia. It began with a scream in the schoolyard. The morning bell had just rung at Westall High School in the Melbourne suburb of Clayton South. Students were heading back toward their classrooms when a girl shouted and pointed toward the sky. A silver disc hovered silently above the trees at the edge of the oval. Within seconds, dozens of students stopped in their tracks. Some gasped, others laughed nervously, but most stood frozen. Necks craned upward, eyes locked on the object moving silently through the clear autumn sky. The disc was metallic, slightly domed, and glowing faintly. It wobbled as it moved, like a plate spinning on a stick. One student would later recall the object glided westward, descending over the tree line before disappearing behind a row of pine trees bordering a nearby paddock. And then chaos erupted. Roughly 200 students from both Westall High and Westall Primary ran toward the fence, jumping it to chase after the mysterious object. Teachers followed, shouting for students to come back. But curiosity was stronger than discipline that morning. Children poured through the school's back gate into the open field beyond, where several witnesses said the disc had briefly touched down. It was gone within minutes, but the impression it left, both literally and figuratively, has endured for decades. What happened that morning in 1966 is still one of the largest mass UFO sightings in Australian history, and it remains unexplained. Back at the school, students buzzed with excitement and confusion. In the teacher's lounge, staff huddled, some shaken, some doubtful. That's when the men in dark suits arrived. Witnesses recall them as government officials, although no one could confirm which department they were from. They didn't offer identification. They simply asked questions quietly, insistently, and told the school staff that nothing had happened, that students were mistaken, that it was a weather balloon. And then they left. Within hours, the school received another visitor, a team from Channel 9 News. A journalist and cameraman arrived to interview students and teachers, but strangely, the footage never aired. It was reportedly seized or lost. One journalist later told researchers he was instructed to stop pursuing the story. Meanwhile, at the site in the paddock where several students claimed the disc had landed, a large circular patch of flattened grass had appeared. Several boys reported approaching the site before the object lifted off again and shot into the sky with impossible speed. "I saw it go straight up," said Joy Clark, a student at the time. "Not at an angle. Straight up. and it was gone in seconds. Another student, Terry Peck, told investigators that she saw 5 planes chasing the object just before it disappeared. Several others described hearing a humming or whirring sound just before it ascended. The pilots of those planes were never identified, nor was any military activity in the area officially acknowledged. The official explanation, hastily given in the days after, was a weather balloon. But students knew better. "They told us it was just a balloon," one said years later. "But we saw it with our own eyes. It was not a balloon. It moved like nothing we've ever seen." Teachers were warned not to talk to the media. Students were told to forget what they saw. At least one staff member who insisted on speaking publicly was dismissed soon after. Some students said they were pulled aside by men claiming to be from the government and told firmly to stop talking. Decades later, a science teacher at Westall named Andrew Greenwood broke his silence. He had seen the object himself. "It was a dull, gray, almost metallic object," he told researchers. "It hovered, moved at incredible speed, and made no noise." He said 2 officials came to his home afterward and warned him not to speak about it. "They threatened my job, my career, my reputation." Despite the pressure to stay silent, the story lived on, passed from student to student, decade to decade, until witnesses began coming forward in the early 2000s as the stigma surrounding UFO encounters began to fade. In 2006, on the 40th anniversary of the event, a public gathering was held near the school, and many of the original witnesses came forward. Their stories had never changed. Perhaps the most compelling aspect of the Westall encounter is the sheer number of consistent, independent eyewitness accounts. Teachers, students, and local residents all described the same craft, the same movements, and the same cover-up. These weren't people seeking attention. In many cases, they feared ridicule and had stayed silent for decades. Physical evidence. The crop circle in the field was never formally analyzed. The paddock itself was quickly bulldozed and later developed. The Channel 9 footage is still missing. Any official report, if it exists, has never been made public. Even skeptics have struggled to dismiss the case. Weather balloons don't land and take off vertically. They don't hover or move sideways, and they certainly don't outrun planes. The Westall incident stands today as one of the most enduring unsolved mass sightings in UFO history. It happened in broad daylight, witnessed by hundreds, and followed by a pattern of silence and suppression. If this had been a single witness account, it could be dismissed. But it wasn't. It was a shared experience, a communal truth, a moment in which the sky opened briefly to reveal something completely foreign, and then closed again. The students who saw it are now adults in their 60s and 70s. Many still carry the memory vividly. Some still dream about it. A few have spent years trying to understand what they saw that day in April 1966. Joy Clark, in a 2010 interview, said it best. "We were kids, but we weren't stupid. We saw something, and whatever it was, it didn't belong to this earth." The Cash Landrum radiation case, December 29, 1980, near Huffman, Texas, USA. They weren't chasing lights in the sky. ChatGPT said they weren't thrill seekers, conspiracy believers, or sky watchers. They were 2 women and a child driving home on a quiet winter night. The road was narrow and empty, FM Warteen 85, cutting through the thick East Texas pine woods between New Caney and Huffman. It was the kind of place where the sky felt close and the forest surrounded you. No street lights, no other cars, just blacktop, brush, and pine. Then, without warning, the sky lit up. Betty Cash was behind the wheel. Beside her sat her friend, Vicki Landrum, a devoted Christian and grandmother. In the back seat, 7-year-old Colby Landrum, Vicky's grandson, was buckled in. They had just finished dinner at a local restaurant and were heading back to Dayton, Texas, where they lived. What they saw next would become one of the most disturbing and lasting unsolved cases in UFO history. Ahead of them, hovering low over the road, was a massive diamond-shaped object. It was metallic, rough-edged, and glowing with an orange-red light. From its base came bursts of flame and waves of roaring heat. The object had no markings, no signs, and no navigation lights. Apart from the deep whooshing roar of the fire below, it was silent. Betty stopped the car. It was impossible to drive forward. The object blocked the road. Vicky later said she thought it might be the end of the world, believing at first it could be a religious vision. She stepped outside briefly with Colby, but the intense heat forced them back. Betty stayed outside longer, watching the object until the overwhelming heat drove her back inside as well. She burned her hand on the metal door handle. Suddenly, the object began to lift into the air. Then came the sound of rotors. A formation of helicopters, at least 23 according to the witnesses, appeared over the trees. Many were clearly CH-47 Chinooks, the kind used by the U.S. Army. Others were smaller, possibly UH-1 Hueys. The helicopters surrounded the object in a wide arc, escorting it as it slowly drifted away and eventually vanished into the night sky. The road was empty again. The object was gone, but the damage was only beginning. The three continued their drive home, shaken and silent. Within hours, all of them began to feel sick. Betty suffered the worst. That night, she developed a pounding headache, nausea, and vomiting. By the next morning, her face and scalp were swollen, red, and blistered. Soon, her hair began falling out in clumps. Vicky developed burns and eye damage. Colby had a rash, sunburn-like irritation and vomiting. Betty was admitted to Parkway General Hospital in Houston and placed in isolation. Doctors struggled to find a diagnosis. Her symptoms closely matched radiation poisoning, especially from beta and gamma rays, vomiting, skin damage, abnormal blood cell counts, and a weakened immune system. Her condition worsened over the next few days. The hospital's own records, later reviewed by investigators, documented these symptoms in real time. Vicky's and Colby's symptoms were less severe, likely because they had less direct exposure. Vicky suffered long-term eye problems and skin sensitivity. Colby's rash and trauma gradually healed, but he carried emotional scars into adulthood. Searching for answers, the women contacted multiple authorities. They reached out to local police and nearby military bases. They wrote to their congressman. They contacted Bergstrom Air Force Base, Fort Hood, and Ellington Field, asking if helicopters had been dispatched that night. Every agency denied that any aircraft were in the area. John Schuessler, an aerospace engineer at McDonnell Douglas and a founding member of MUFON, began investigating in early 1981. He interviewed the witnesses, visited the site, and reviewed Betty's medical records and photographs of her injuries. Schuessler noted the consistency of their testimonies, even when given separately. He also pointed out that the witnesses were not UFO enthusiasts, had no history of dramatic claims, and stood to lose by going public. Yet they persisted. His report, The Cash Landrum UFO Incident, remains one of the most detailed and medically documented UFO cases ever published. In 1982, Betty and Vicky filed a lawsuit against the U.S. government seeking $20 million in damages for their health problems. Their attorney, Peter Gersten, argued that the government had either used or failed to control a dangerous craft and was therefore responsible. But the case stalled during discovery. Sworn statements from Army and Air Force officials denied the presence of helicopters or military aircraft in the area. With no proof of government involvement, the lawsuit was dismissed in 1986. Despite this, the case stayed prominent in UFO research and appeared on TV shows like Unsolved Mysteries, Strange But True, and Sightings. Images of Betty's blistered skin and hospital records became central evidence in documentaries about UFO encounters with physical effects. Alternative theories appeared. One of the most common was that the craft was an experimental U.S. military vehicle, possibly nuclear-powered. The presence of helicopters supported this theory, suggesting a highly important operation. Some researchers linked it to Project Moondust or other Cold War missions to retrieve foreign or unusual space objects. Others speculated it was a malfunctioning satellite or a secret project involving radioactive material. Skeptics argued that a convoy of 23 helicopters could not go unnoticed by civilian or military radar. Yet FAA records showed nothing unusual, and no other civilians reported such a large formation that night. Still, the possibility of a secret operation couldn't be ruled out. Many projects of the 1980s were declassified only decades later. The object's radiation effects, heat, and diamond shape didn't match any known technology. No aircraft in the U.S. fleet at that time was diamond-shaped or capable of producing such injuries. By the 1990s, Betty and Vicky were still struggling with health problems. Betty had multiple surgeries for damage to her digestive system, skin, and eyes. Vicky, once healthy, developed cataracts, skin lesions, and vision loss. Both women insisted until their deaths that what they saw was real, and that the government was hiding the truth. Betty Cash died in 1998 at age 69. Vicky Landrum passed away in 2007. Colby, now an adult, rarely speaks about the case but has never contradicted his earlier statements. Freedom of Information Act requests into the 2000s still produced no evidence of military involvement. No flight records placed helicopters in the area. The case remains unsolved. What sets the Cash Landrum case apart from other UFO encounters is the combination of direct human suffering, long-term medical documentation, and the presence of military aircraft, all still unexplained. It is one of the few UFO cases that led to a lawsuit against the U.S. government, and one where the main evidence is not shaky video or witness drawings, but hospital records and lab tests. To this day, there is no official explanation. The helicopters remain unidentified. The object was never seen again. The site, revisited many times, holds no further clues. But the human cost remains. 3 ordinary people encountered something extraordinary. 2 of them were permanently harmed. And despite the injuries, the evidence, the consistent testimonies, and the public records, the government's answer is still the same. We were not there. And perhaps that's the part that still hurts the most. The Colares Lights, 1977, Colares Island, Pará, Brazil. In the second half of 1977, a quiet fishing community off Brazil's northern coast became the center of a wave of aerial phenomena. Events that left residents injured, terrified, and abandoned by the institutions meant to protect them. This was not a single sighting. It wasn't just a fleeting light in the sky. For months, the people of Colares said they were under aerial attack. It started slowly. Strange lights, small, fast-moving orbs, appeared over the ocean and darted across the night sky. At first, locals ignored them, but soon the lights hovered above homes, followed boats, and sometimes descended so close that people felt targeted. By October, things escalated. The lights returned night after night, and the reports grew more disturbing. Witnesses described intense beams of light, narrow and focused, shooting down from the craft and striking people. Victims reported burns, puncture wounds, paralysis, and extreme fatigue. The lights seemed to deliberately choose targets. Many victims were struck in the chest or neck, and most were women. The injuries included small burn marks or punctures, along with weakness and symptoms resembling radiation exposure, nausea, dizziness, headaches, and anemia. One woman later recalled waking in the night to see a bright blue beam piercing her ceiling and pinning her to her bed. She lost consciousness seconds later. Locals began calling the phenomenon chupa chupa, literally suck suck, believing the lights were draining blood or energy from people. Fear spread across the island. Fishermen refused to go out at night. Families moved their beds to the center of their homes, away from windows and rooftops. Some built makeshift shelters lined with foil, hoping to block the beams. Churches filled every night with frightened families. The mayor of Colares, José Eladio Fabião Serrao, appealed to the Brazilian military for help. What followed was one of the most remarkable military responses to a civilian UFO crisis in history. Brazil's Air Force dispatched a task force under a classified mission called Operação Prato, Operation Saucer. Led by Captain Uirangue Bolívar Soares Nogueira de Holanda Lima, the team arrived in late October 1977 with cameras, telescopes, radar, and mapping tools. For 4 months, they conducted one of the most thorough official UFO investigations ever recorded. The military set up observation posts around Colares and nearby towns. They collected hundreds of hours of film and photographs. Dozens of sightings were logged, and Air Force officers themselves saw the lights up close. Reports described objects ranging from small probes to larger structured craft, spheres, ellipses, even disks. Some glowed, others emitted beams of colored light. They behaved intelligently, hovering, changing direction suddenly, and sometimes reacting to soldiers' flashlights or equipment. But the attacks did not stop. Locals continued to be struck by the beams. Some soldiers later admitted to being scared and confused. They had been sent to observe, not to fight. In February 1978, the mission was suddenly shut down. The military quietly withdrew, claiming there was no threat or foreign activity. But the mystery deepened. For decades, the operation was only a rumor, whispered in UFO circles. That changed in 1997, when the Brazilian government declassified portions of the Operation Saucer files. Over 2,000 pages of documents, sketches, and photos were released, including dozens of witness testimonies and military logs. They confirmed that the military had indeed investigated and had gathered large amounts of evidence. Photos showed lights hovering over the water. Sketches showed craft emitting beams. Victim diagrams documented injuries. Many testimonies matched: a sudden beam, paralysis, blackout, followed by weakness and lasting fatigue. Even more revealing were interviews with Captain Holanda himself. In 1997, just before his death, he admitted the sightings were real and said the military had hidden the truth to prevent panic. He described the craft as intelligent, able to respond to signals, follow people, and vanish when approached. He claimed that at least once, a craft hovered within 100 meters of a military post. Weeks later, Holanda was found dead, hanged in his home. His death was ruled a suicide, but the timing fueled speculation. Some believed he was under pressure after his disclosures. Others thought he could no longer live with the burden of secrecy. Despite the declassification, many Operation Saucer files remain secret, including film and high-resolution photos. Requests for full release have been ignored. No official explanation has ever been given for what happened in Colares. Medical records from the time support the claims. Dr. Waleed Sessom Carvalho, who treated over 40 victims, reported burns, blood disorders, and extreme fatigue. She said military officers pressured her to stay quiet. She refused, later stating that the victims had suffered real harm and that the phenomenon was beyond human technology. By late 1978, the events faded. The lights stopped. Injuries ceased. Life slowly returned to normal, but the trauma remained. Older residents still avoid speaking of it. Some report nightmares, anxiety, and fear of sleeping near windows. To this day, Colares remains one of the most well-documented mass UFO events involving civilian harm. The case is unique for the scale of sightings, the military's involvement, the technical evidence collected, and the later effort to hide it. Researchers, doctors, and defense analysts have studied it for decades. Some think it was surveillance by a non-human intelligence. Others suspect a secret weapons test. A few argue it was an unknown natural phenomenon. But no theory explains the targeted beams or the injuries. Perhaps the most haunting part of the Colares lights is that no authority, government, military, or scientific, ever gave the islanders an answer. They were left, quite literally, in the dark. That was the first thing anyone heard from Deputy Val Johnson after the incident. His voice came through the radio, calm but shaken. No sirens, no screams. Just a strange message from a trusted lawman parked on a lonely stretch of road in the middle of the night. The call lasted only seconds, but it opened one of the most lasting unsolved cases in American UFO history. A strange crash, recorded injuries, physical damage, stopped electronics, and a witness who never changed his story. It all began on a flat, quiet highway in northern Minnesota. Val Johnson, a deputy sheriff with the Marshall County Sheriff's Office, was on routine patrol in the early morning hours of August 27, 1979. The area was typical of the Red River Valley: flat farmland, empty roads, and a huge open sky. Johnson was driving north on State Highway 220 near the town of Warren. It was 1:40 a.m. Moments earlier, dispatch had received a call about a possible aircraft or strange light coming down east of Stephen, Minnesota. Johnson was the closest officer on duty. He changed course and drove toward the area to investigate. He never made it to the call. About 10 minutes later, Johnson radioed back to say something had hit his vehicle. He was hurt. His car wasn't working. Help was sent right away. When officers arrived, they found Johnson in his Ford LTD patrol car, awake but confused. The windshield was smashed inward. The hood was dented. The antenna was bent back sharply. And strangest of all, both his wristwatch and the car's dashboard clock had stopped, frozen, at exactly 2:19 a.m. According to Johnson's report, as he was driving toward the light from the first call, he saw a small, very bright light hovering low above the road ahead. He thought it might be a crashed plane or a car with its headlights on. As he got closer, the light suddenly shot toward him. "I remember the light covering the whole car. That's the last thing I saw before I blacked out," he told investigators. Johnson woke up seconds or minutes later with the car off the road, engine still running in the grass. The windshield was cracked in a round pattern, not like a stone or animal strike. His eyes were watering and swollen, similar to a mild flash burn. His upper face had redness and a slight burn-like irritation. Doctors at Warren Hospital later confirmed the injuries, but found no long-term damage. The damage to the car confused everyone. The antenna, made of strong metal, was bent in a way that needed great force, but the base wasn't broken. The emergency roof light was cracked, and the hood had a round dent. Even stranger, the dashboard clock and Johnson's wristwatch had both stopped at the exact same time, 2:19 a.m. They worked again after being reset, but had clearly been interrupted by something like an electrical or magnetic force. Marshall County Sheriff Dennis Brecka quickly worked to protect the evidence. Photos were taken of the car and the scene. Johnson was interviewed the same day, and his statement was recorded several times in the weeks after. He never changed it. The car was sent to experts for study. Ford Motor Company engineers looked at the damage but couldn't explain it. There were no signs of a crash with another car or animal. No blood, no fur, no other tire tracks. Skid marks showed the car had braked hard, turned, then rolled to a stop. Investigators from the Center for UFO Studies, QFOS, led by Alan Hendry, did a full study. Hendry called the case one of the most believable he had ever seen. The report stressed Johnson's honesty, the physical evidence, and the lack of any reason for a fake story. Attempts to copy the antenna damage failed. Scientists, engineers, and even a physicist from the University of Minnesota studied the car, but no one could bend the antenna in the same way without breaking it. The windshield's circular crack was also unusual. It didn't look like normal impact damage. Even the flashlight clipped to the dashboard had melted in spots, as if hit by intense local heat. Val Johnson was a respected deputy with a clean record. No disciplinary issues, no history of mental problems, and no interest in UFOs before this. His fellow officers called him calm, professional, and very private. After the incident, Johnson gave interviews to local and national media. He stayed quiet and careful in his words. "I don't know what it was," he often said. "I just know it was real." He didn't guess. He never claimed it was aliens. He never looked for attention. In fact, after a short burst of media coverage, he withdrew from public life. He returned to work for a while, then left law enforcement and moved to another part of the state. He refused most interview requests later, but never took back his story. News of the crash spread quickly. The Associated Press picked it up, and it was broadcast across the country. For weeks, Warren, Minnesota was flooded with reporters, researchers, and UFO fans. The incident became a favorite on radio shows and TV specials. It was featured on That's Incredible, Unsolved Mysteries, and in many books and UFO documentaries. But the core facts never changed. Val Johnson was alone on a flat road. He saw a bright light. It rushed at him. He blacked out. He was hurt. His car was damaged. His watch and clock stopped. And no one, not local police, not Ford engineers, not UFO skeptics, ever explained it. Some theories were offered. Some skeptics said Johnson may have fallen asleep or had a micro-sleep and gone off the road. But that didn't explain the antenna, the stopped clocks, or the uniform damage. Others suggested ball lightning, meteors, or a transformer exploding. Again, none explained all the injuries, damage, and timing. Even strong skeptics found the case hard to deny. Philip Klass, known for attacking UFO reports, stayed silent on this case, something some researchers see as quiet admission of its mystery. Today, Johnson's patrol car is displayed at the Marshall County Historical Society Museum in Warren. Thousands visit it every year. It remains in the same condition as after the crash, with the dented hood, bent antenna, and cracked windshield. The dashboard clock is still frozen at 2:19 a.m. In 2015, Minnesota Public Radio revisited the case, interviewing surviving officers and townspeople. The agreement was simple. Something happened that night, and no one has ever explained it. Even decades later, locals still remember the excitement and mystery. Retired Sheriff Brecka once said, "We were never able to explain it." And Val was not the type to make something like this up. That's all I can say. The Val Johnson patrol car crash remains one of the most puzzling and well-documented vehicle-related UFO cases in the world. It involves a trained police officer, physical evidence, multiple investigations, and injuries matching exposure to strong energy, with no known source. There are no photos of the object, no radar data, no other witnesses, but there is the car, there is the clock, and there is the man who saw something he could never explain and never tried to. Whatever happened in those woods left marks on the soil, on the instruments, and on the minds of the people who walked into the forest, expecting nothing more than another cold, quiet night. The Japan Airlines radar mystery, November 17, 1986, over eastern Alaska airspace, USA. The sky was clear at cruising altitude. Nothing was on the radar except open air. Japan Airlines Flight 1628, a Boeing 747 cargo freighter, had been in the air for several hours, making its regular journey from Paris to Tokyo with a scheduled stop in Anchorage. On board were 3 crew members: Captain Kenju Terauchi, an experienced pilot and former fighter pilot with over 10,000 hours of flying time, First Officer Takanori Tamafuji, and flight engineer Yoshio Tsukuba. They entered U.S. airspace over Alaska without any problems, flying at 35,000 feet. At 5:11 p.m. local time, as the plane approached the eastern edge of Alaska's interior, something appeared on their radar screen, an object moving strangely. Moments later, the crew confirmed it visually. 2 small, round, glowing craft were flying close together. They did not blink like normal aircraft lights, and their movements were unlike anything seen in commercial or military aviation. The lights moved alongside the left side of the plane and began pacing the 747. The crew watched in disbelief as the objects performed sudden climbs and quick slowdowns, movements impossible for any known aircraft at the time. Then they moved directly in front of the Boeing, as if escorting it. Captain Terauchi later described the experience in official reports and interviews. The objects were described as 2 small craft and 1 large mothership. The smaller ones looked rectangular and emitted bursts of light that lit up the cockpit. The light was so strong it temporarily disrupted the visibility of the flight instruments. Terauchi even felt heat on his face through the glass. He compared the objects to spaceships from science fiction, adding that they performed moves no normal aircraft could do. Then the situation escalated. About 10 minutes after the first sighting, a huge dark object appeared behind the plane. Terauchi said it was as big as 2 aircraft carriers and shaped like a walnut, long with panels or structures on its surface. It followed the 747 closely and steadily. Even though it was night, the moonlight allowed the crew to see the outline clearly. Both the flight engineer and first officer confirmed seeing it with their own eyes. At 5:19 p.m., Captain Terauchi contacted the FAA Air Route Traffic Control Center in Anchorage to report the sighting. Controllers first saw nothing unusual on radar, but within minutes, they began to detect a primary return, a radar echo without a transponder signal, near Flight 1628's position. The FAA tried to confirm. Military radar at Elmendorf Air Force Base and other nearby stations also picked up occasional signals of an unknown object following the Japanese flight. Controllers asked if the crew wanted to change altitude or take evasive action. Terauchi agreed, trying to descend and change course multiple times, but the craft stayed with them. Controllers then sent a United Airlines flight and a U.S. Air Force C-130 cargo plane to check. The C-130 reported no visual sightings, but by that time the objects had disappeared from both the sky and radar. The Japanese crew remained shaken but kept control, continuing safely to Anchorage. they landed without incident, but the story was far from over. The investigation was immediate and detailed. Captain Tarucci filed written reports and sketches showing the craft's look and movements. His crew confirmed the main details. The FAA launched an inquiry that included radar analysis, cockpit voice recordings, and interviews with controllers and military staff. Data showed that a radar return had indeed been recorded near Flight 1628 during the encounter. Unlike normal radar signals from aircraft with transponders, this one had no ID and did not match any scheduled flights. The radar confirmed the Japanese crew's report that something had followed them for over 30 minutes across hundreds of miles. John Callahan, FAA Division Chief of Accidents and Investigations at the time, became directly involved. He later stated publicly that a secret meeting was held between the FAA, CIA, FBI, and Department of Defense shortly after the event. In this meeting, radar data, voice tapes, and crew testimonies were reviewed in a classified setting. According to Callahan, CIA representatives told everyone not to discuss the event, insisting it did not happen. The data and tapes were taken, and much of the case was buried for years. However, Callahan kept copies of the original radar and voice recordings, later releasing them in the 2000s. This confirmed the event and the federal response. Despite the evidence, Captain Tarucci faced backlash. Japan Airlines grounded him soon after, citing the media attention. He was moved to a desk job despite his perfect safety record and long experience. While the official reason was said to be unrelated, many believed his credibility had been harmed, not for mistakes, but for describing something that had no official explanation. The media widely reported on the sighting, gaining national and international attention. Newspapers in both the US and Japan covered it, and major TV outlets aired Tarucci's translated statements and radar footage. In 1987, the FAA admitted the radar data and voice recordings were real. A spokesperson confirmed that something had been detected near Flight 1628, but said its origin could not be determined. UFO researchers praised the case as one of the best documented ever, combining expert pilot testimony, real-time FAA communications, radar data from civilian and military sources, and the crew's physical reactions. Few UFO cases have such strong observational and instrumental evidence, especially in heavily monitored airspace. Skeptics suggested explanations. Some claimed Tarucci misidentified the planet Jupiter or reflections on the cockpit glass. Others blamed weather effects such as ice crystals or ground light reflections. But these failed to explain the radar confirmation, the crew's long visual tracking, and the clear descriptions of structured maneuvering craft, especially the massive mothership. Even among military and aviation professionals, the case stayed unresolved. Former FAA official John Callahan criticized the government's secrecy, arguing that the safety risks alone demanded transparency. In later years, Captain Tarucci stood by his story. In rare interviews, he insisted he had seen a physical, intelligently controlled object, one that reacted to his aircraft, held formation, and gave off light and heat. He said that as a trained fighter and airline pilot, he knew how to recognize aircraft shapes and behavior, and this was beyond anything he had ever seen. The Japan Airlines radar case remains unique in UFO history, not vague, but precise. Unlike cases based only on eyewitness accounts, this one was recorded, logged, and investigated by multiple agencies, only to be quietly hidden. To this day, much of the government's discussion about the event has not been released. But what is known is compelling. A trained crew saw something massive and maneuvering. It appeared on radar. It was reported live, and it followed them for nearly 400 miles before disappearing. The legacy of Flight 1628 lives on, not in official records, but in aviation logs, radar archives, and the memory of a pilot who looked into the Alaskan night sky and saw something he was never meant to see, something no one has explained. "There's something hovering over the trees behind our house," she told the dispatcher. "It's big, really big, and it's not making a sound." Within minutes, the line rang again. This time, a man driving on Route 9. "It's above me right now," he said. "Triangular shape, huge lights all around it. I pulled over. I had to. You've got to send someone." And then another call. Then 10 more. It was just past 9 p.m. on March 24th, 1983, when the Yorktown Heights Police Department found itself overwhelmed by the number of eyewitness reports. By 9:30, the roads were lined with stopped cars and pointing fingers. People stood on their lawns, in fields, on rooftops, all staring skyward at the same thing. A vast, silent craft covered in multicolored lights crept through the night sky like a ghost made of steel and glass. It wasn't a one-time event. It wasn't a hoax, and it wouldn't be going away anytime soon. What began as a strange report in late 1982 would grow into a years-long phenomenon. Hundreds of sightings across dozens of towns, seen by thousands of witnesses, became known as the Hudson Valley UFO wave. The first widely shared incident happened on December 31st, 1982. While most celebrated New Year's Eve, residents of Kent and Brewster, New York, looked to the sky in alarm. They reported seeing a boomerang-shaped craft, massive in size, with rows of lights along the underside. It moved slowly and silently, floating just above the treetops. For some, it passed directly overhead. For others, it hovered long enough that neighbors gathered outside to see it together. Calls flooded into local police departments, especially in Putnam and Dutchess counties. Officers on duty that night confirmed receiving dozens of reports within the hour. One deputy, responding to a call about a possible downed aircraft, found no debris, but did confirm something unusual had passed overhead. Throughout 1983 and into 1984, the sightings increased. Descriptions stayed the same: a V-shaped or boomerang-like object with white and multicolored lights, sometimes blinking or rotating. It was always silent. In some cases, it hovered for minutes before speeding away and vanishing. In others, it seemed to follow roads or glide along river valleys. The sheer number of witnesses began to attract attention far beyond the Hudson Valley. On March 24, 1983, the same night of the dispatch overload, over 300 residents across several counties claimed to have seen the object. Many described the same pattern. It would appear slowly, stay overhead for a while, then drift off with no sound. Some thought it was the size of a football field. People stopped their cars, stood on hoods, and pointed in disbelief. Among them were professionals, engineers, scientists, and pilots. A local air traffic controller, who asked not to be named, later admitted he watched the object through binoculars from a tower window and could not identify it as any known aircraft. It did not appear on radar. A CBS News crew arrived in April 1983 to interview witnesses. Their broadcast included multiple first-hand accounts, including that of a retired commercial airline pilot who insisted the object was unlike anything he had ever seen. He emphasized its ability to move in complete silence and hover motionlessly, traits unknown in normal aircraft. Photos began to surface. Though many were unclear, a few long-exposure images captured light patterns consistent with a large craft. One notable photo, taken by amateur astronomer Andrew Grunwell, showed an arc of lights moving across the night sky in a smooth curve, supporting the idea of a solid object rather than multiple planes. Investigators from the Mutual UFO Network, MUFON, and the Center for UFO Studies, QFOS, sent teams to the area. They interviewed witnesses, mapped sighting locations, and recorded times, weather, and descriptions. A clear timeline of repeated events emerged, with clusters of sightings every few weeks, most often on clear nights. In May 1984, the journal News ran a week-long series on the phenomenon, publishing interviews with over 50 witnesses, including police officers. Local law enforcement, once doubtful, began to take the reports more seriously. Officers who responded to multiple calls admitted they had seen the object themselves. One officer described it as like a floating city, huge, slow, and completely silent. Skeptics pointed to a local group of ultralight aircraft enthusiasts as the likely cause. Led by Howard Stein, a Poughkeepsie man and licensed pilot, the group had reportedly flown in formation with colored lights attached to their craft. In later interviews, Stein claimed many of the sightings could be explained by his group's flights, especially from a private field in Stormville. However, while Stein's group may have explained some incidents, many researchers and witnesses rejected the idea it accounted for most reports. Ultralight aircraft have limited range and cannot hover or fly safely at night without FAA clearance. Most also cannot carry heavy lighting rigs, nor could they match the silent flight described by dozens of trained observers. In one investigation, aviation expert Philip Imbrogno interviewed several witnesses with decades of military flight experience. They were sure the craft they saw was not a group of small planes, but a single massive object with coordinated lights. Air traffic logs from Stewart Air Force Base and Westchester County Airport showed no unusual military or commercial activity during the peak sighting times. FOIA requests to the FAA and NASA revealed no classified activity or known experimental flights in the region. By 1985, reports became less frequent, but they didn't stop. Sightings continued into the 1990s, many with the same basic details. One late report in 1992 mirrored those from a decade earlier. A slow, silent object gliding above a rural road near Pine Plains, seen by a mother and her teenage son. Their drawings matched dozens collected years before. Books, documentaries, and articles have since covered the Hudson Valley wave. The late J. Allen Hynek reviewed some of the early reports before his death and called them some of the most credible he had ever seen. The consistency, the number of witnesses, and the lack of signs of hysteria, he wrote, suggests something real happened. Exactly what, I do not know. No official explanation has ever been given. No experimental craft has been revealed that matches the behavior described. And no hoax has been shown that could explain the scale and length of the sightings. Today, the Hudson Valley UFO wave remains one of the best documented and most compelling cases of mass UFO activity in modern history. It defied explanation, involved thousands of credible witnesses, and happened not in secret, but in plain sight, just north of New York City. A retired engineer who saw the object in 1984 said it best in a 2007 interview. People say, "Why didn't anyone get proof?" I say, "We did. We all saw it. We didn't need proof. We watched it with our own eyes." The sky fell silent again after 1986. But for many in the Hudson Valley, what they saw never left them. The Frederick Valentich disappearance, October 21st, 1978, Bass Strait, Australia. It was just before sunset when the transmission began. Calm, routine, nothing unusual. Melbourne, this is Delta Sierra Juliet. Is there any known traffic below 5,000? The controller at Melbourne Flight Service looked over the radar screen. Delta Sierra Juliet, no known traffic. A moment passed. "It seems to be a large aircraft below 5,000, the pilot said. "It just passed over me at least 1,000 feet above." That pilot was 20-year-old Frederick Valentich, flying solo in a rented Cessna 182L aircraft. His voice, clipped and professional, soon revealed a growing edge of anxiety. Over the next 6 minutes, his transmissions grew stranger. Fragmented reports of an unidentified craft, unusual movements, a metallic shine, a green light, and then, "It's not an aircraft." Those were his last words. The signal went silent. Frederick Valentich vanished. His plane was never recovered. No wreckage was ever conclusively found. To this day, the disappearance remains one of the most chilling and debated aviation mysteries in Australian history. At the center, a young pilot, a UFO report transmitted in real time, and the silence that followed. Frederick Valentich was no casual flyer. Though young, he held a Class 4 instrument rating, allowing him to fly at night in clear conditions. He had logged about 150 flight hours. Not a lot, but enough for someone training toward a commercial license. Described as quiet and studious, Valentich had a strong interest in aviation and a well-documented fascination with UFOs. That fact would later be used by skeptics, but it also made his final report all the more specific. On October 21, 1978 at 6:19 p.m., Valentich departed Moorabbin Airport in Victoria, Australia, heading to King Island. The trip was filed under visual flight rules, meaning he relied on sight, not instruments. The weather was fair, visibility was good. He never arrived. Roughly 40 minutes into the flight, while over Bass Strait, a notoriously rough stretch of water between mainland Australia and Tasmania, Valentich contacted air traffic control to report something odd. He claimed an unknown aircraft was approaching from the east. At first, he described it as a long object with 4 bright lights, but within moments, his tone changed. "It just passed over me. It seems to be stationary. I'm orbiting, and the thing is orbiting on top of me." The controller asked him to confirm the aircraft type. Valentich replied, "It's not an aircraft." He described a shiny metallic exterior and a green light. He said it vanished, then reappeared on a different course. He claimed the object was playing cat and mouse, matching his movements, circling him. Then came the final transmission. It was cut short by a metallic scraping sound, later studied by audio experts. They said it was consistent with mechanical interference, but it was never explained. Search and rescue operations began almost immediately. Both air and sea patrols combed Bass Strait. Over the next week, aircraft from the Royal Australian Air Force, civilian planes, and marine vessels searched more than 1,000 square miles. No trace of Valentich or his plane was found. 2 years later, in 1980, an engine cowl, possibly from a Cessna 182, washed ashore on Flinders Island. Investigators suspected it could be from Valentich's plane, but the part number was missing, and no serial data confirmed the match. The rest of the plane was never recovered. Media coverage exploded. A real-time UFO report, a missing plane, and no evidence fueled both speculation and doubt. Inquiries were launched by the Australian Department of Transport and the Civil Aviation Authority. The official report, released months later, classified the incident as missing aircraft, cause unknown, but it included one chilling note. The reason for the disappearance has not been determined, but the possibility that the aircraft was interfered with by an unknown object cannot be ruled out. Several theories emerged. Some aviation experts believed Valentich became disoriented and flew upside down, mistaking reflections in the water for lights in the sky. In this scenario, he would have crashed into Bass Strait without realizing his altitude. But this ignored a key fact. The Cessna 182L was not built for upside-down flight. The engine would likely have stalled quickly. Valentich also had training in night flying and no known history of disorientation. Another theory suggested Valentich staged his own disappearance. Investigators looked into his personal life, finances, and relationships. No serious issues were found. His fuel load was checked. He had enough to reach King Island and return, but not much more. Most importantly, nothing ever turned up. No money withdrawals, no passport use, no new identity. Valentich was simply gone. Then there was the UFO theory, supported by the audio recordings and transcripts of his last communication. In the days after, multiple independent witnesses came forward. Campers near Cape Otway reported seeing a green light in the sky that night. A farmer claimed he saw a cigar-shaped craft hovering over his property with a light on top. Others along the coast reported strange aerial lights moving in unusual patterns. The most well-known civilian report came from a plumber and his wife driving along the Great Ocean Road. They said they saw a bright green object dart across the sky, stop mid-air, and then shoot upward, all in seconds. MUFON and the Aerial Phenomena Research Organization, APRO, both launched investigations. J. Allen Hynek, the former Project Blue Book consultant, reviewed the case. He considered it one of the most compelling UFO-related aviation disappearances on record. The real-time communication, multiple witnesses, and lack of debris made it stand out. Skeptics argued Valentich's interest in UFOs made him prone to misinterpret lights or stars. He had spoken about UFOs before and even worried about encounters. Some claimed he may have mistaken Venus or Mars for a craft, but weather records show Venus had not yet risen at the time, and Mars was not visible. And panic alone doesn't explain a 6-minute back and forth with air traffic control, during which Valentich stayed technical and precise until the final seconds. In 2012, the original audio recordings were declassified and released to the public. The tape confirmed the transcripts, but added more detail. Valentich's voice was calm, but tense, growing more disturbed. One of the last full sentences recorded was, "That strange aircraft is hovering on top of me again. It's hovering, and it's not an aircraft." To this day, no one has solved the mystery of Frederick Valentich. No wreckage, no body, no confession, no clear reconstruction. His family maintains that he saw what he said he saw. His father, Guido Valentich, told reporters in 1983, he would not make this up. He was a serious boy. If he said there was something there, there was. The Bass Strait remains a place of sea and air mystery, often compared to the Bermuda Triangle. In history, the region has seen dozens of unexplained disappearances and plane accidents. While some are no doubt due to weather and navigation dangers, the Valentich case stands out for its recorded interaction between a pilot and an unknown object. Today, the story is taught in aviation ethics and safety classes. UFO researchers call it one of the most believable pilot UFO encounters ever recorded. A memorial plaque sits at Cape Otway, marking the last known radar contact with Frederick Valentich. And that final phrase, "It's not an aircraft," has become etched in the records of unsolved aviation history. What did Frederick Valentich see? Where did he go? We may never know. The Redlands UFO and Crop Burn, 1992, Redlands, California, USA. The night was unusually quiet for Southern California. Just before midnight, a local farmer named Frank Ramirez stepped out of his simple Redlands home to check on a strange light hovering near his fields. His dog, normally fearless, refused to follow him past the porch. Frank squinted toward the distant rows of crops. The light was still there, bright, low, and completely silent. It wasn't a star. It wasn't a plane. It just sat there, pulsing like it was alive. Then it moved, not like any aircraft Frank had ever seen. It dipped, drifted side to side, then lowered gently toward the far end of the property before disappearing just above the tree line. There was no explosion, no wind, no sound. By morning, something was wrong with the crops. Frank's alfalfa field, green and healthy the day before, now had a scorched circular patch nearly 30 feet wide. The grass in the area had collapsed outward in a spiral pattern. The outer edge of the circle was discolored, as though exposed to extreme heat, and in the middle, blackened stubble and ash. That was just the beginning. The Redlands case, once a quiet local mystery, soon attracted state investigators, private researchers, and even whispers from law enforcement insiders. What began as a simple crop burn became one of the strangest unsolved incidents of early 1990s California. A close encounter that left behind physical damage, missing evidence, and unanswered questions. Frank Ramirez was a fourth-generation farmer in the Redlands citrus belt. His family had worked that land since the 1940s. On the evening of August 18, 1992, Frank had been repairing fencing when he first noticed an unusual light to the south hovering over his back fields. He dismissed it at first. It was hot, he was tired, and he assumed it was a helicopter. But when he came back outside a few hours later, the light hadn't moved. The object wasn't blinking like a commercial plane. It didn't have red or green markers like a chopper. It hovered absolutely still, then moved in sudden sharp patterns, up, then sideways, then back again. Frank later described it as moving like a mouse on a screen. Quick, sharp, then still again. He didn't report it that night, but by dawn, the damage in his field forced his hand. He called the San Bernardino County Sheriff's Department, who sent a deputy to investigate. Photos were taken. The circle was visible from the road, pressed into the alfalfa as if by a massive weight, but without any tire tracks or vehicle marks. The grass had not been cut or mowed. It was flattened in a clean, round pattern. The center was burned black. The deputy filed a basic report, then told Frank he would notify someone at the nearby March Air Reserve base. Nothing came of that. 3 days later, 2 men in plain clothing visited the Ramirez property. They claimed to be with the Department of Agriculture and asked to take soil samples. Frank, assuming they had been sent by the county, allowed them onto the land. They dug at several spots, center, edge, and untouched perimeter, then left without leaving contact information. When Frank called the county the next day, they had no record of any team being sent. On August 23rd, a local reporter named Sandy Clean picked up the story after hearing about it through her contacts at the sheriff's office. She interviewed Frank, took her own photos, and published a short piece in the Redlands Daily Fax. The article ran under the modest headline, "Farmer Reports Mysterious Crop Damage." It might have ended there, except for one detail. Sandy's film was partly exposed. When she developed her camera roll, the frames taken near the center of the crop circle were fogged with white static patterns. Other photos taken on the same roll just minutes before and after were fine. Her camera, a Nikon F81S, had no history of problems. She had it tested at a local shop. No damage, no explanation. Within a week, Frank Ramirez's story reached the Los Angeles chapter of MUFON. Investigators arrived with Geiger counters, soil testing kits, and magnetometers. What they found shocked them. The soil at the center of the burn area showed an unusual level of magnetic disturbance compared to the rest of the field. While not radioactive, it showed signs of heating to extreme temperatures, confirmed by lab analysis of fused silica particles in the top layer. plants near the center of the circle had cellular damage consistent with sudden dehydration, impossible to achieve without exposure to intense heat or microwave-level energy. A few leaves, when placed under a microscope, showed exploded cell walls. The spiral pattern of the flattened grass also raised eyebrows. Rather than being trampled or cut, the blades had been bent at the base in a consistent clockwise formation. The pattern suggested a controlled force, not random collapse. By mid-September, at least 3 other farms within a 10-mile radius reported similar sightings. Bright hovering lights, low-altitude movement, and strange animal behavior. One rancher claimed his goats had broken through fencing the same night he saw a disc-shaped object pass over the hill behind his barn. Another reported his dogs refusing to enter the western edge of their grazing field for over a week after an unexplained flash in the sky. When asked about the event, the San Bernardino County Sheriff's Department offered no further comment. The original report was never made public, and attempts to obtain it through FOIA were denied due to missing or incomplete records. March Air Reserve Base denied any low-altitude military exercises over the Redlands area during that time. Despite media attention, the event remained a regional curiosity rather than a national story. In part, that was due to timing. 1992 saw bigger headlines in politics, natural disasters, and overseas conflicts. A crop circle in a quiet California farming town didn't hold the news cycle's attention for long. But among researchers, the Redlands case stood out. Unlike many crop circle reports that surfaced later in the UK, many of which were hoaxes or admitted art projects, the Redlands formation came with no artistic intent, no crowds, no publicity-seeking creators. It arrived without warning, was seen by only one witness, and left behind measurable environmental effects. Independent lab results from the MUFON team, published quietly in a 1993 symposium report, suggested that the field had been exposed to a directed energy source capable of rapidly altering plant tissue without burning surrounding areas. The edges of the circle were clean. No fuel residue was found, no evidence of human tampering. And Frank Ramirez, he never tried to profit from the story. He didn't write a book. He declined television interviews. He continued farming the land for another 15 years until his retirement, repeating the same answer to anyone who asked, "I saw what I saw. I don't know what it was, but it wasn't from around here." To this day, the Redlands UFO and crop burn remains one of the few domestic cases in North America where a single witness encounter, unexplained physical evidence, magnetic disturbance, and soil damage came together in one brief event without ever being officially investigated by federal authorities. For researchers, it was a classic CE2 case, close encounter of the second kind. An event where a UFO sighting leaves behind a trace effect. In Redlands, that trace was scorched earth, magnetic interference, and a long, lingering question. Whatever hovered above that field on the night of August 18, 1992, came and went without a sound, but it left a mark, a perfect circle, burned into California soil and burned just as deeply into the mystery of modern UFO history. The Fort Itaipu encounter, 1957, Santos, São Paulo, Brazil. The first explosion of light came just after 2 a.m. Inside the stone walls of Fort Itaipu, a coastal military base guarding the busy port city of Santos, 2 soldiers on night duty were shocked by an intense, silent flash that lit the entire courtyard in white-blue light. There was no thunder, no alarm, just a blinding, unnatural light from the sky above. Private Antonio Carlos Ferrer raised his arm to shield his eyes. His skin tingled. Private Jose da Silva, standing a few meters away, stumbled backward, shouting. Before either could reach their rifles or the alarm, The second flash hit, stronger, closer, and directly overhead. What they saw next would haunt them for the rest of their lives. A hovering oval-shaped craft in the night sky, radiating a heat so intense it scorched the ground and burned their skin. Within minutes, both men collapsed, screaming, disoriented, covered in second and third-degree burns. No explosion, no fire, just pain, heat, and an object that vanished as quickly as it came. The Brazilian military responded quickly, but not as expected. Instead of launching an open investigation, they sealed the fort, restricted access, confiscated records, and quietly transferred the victims to a military hospital. The Fort Itaipu encounter remains one of the earliest and most well-documented cases of direct harm to military personnel caused by an unidentified flying object. It is one of the few UFO cases officially acknowledged by the Brazilian Army, and it still raises hard questions about intent, secrecy, and what visited that base in the early hours of November 4th, 1957. Moreover, why the secrecy? Why the lockdown? Why the denial? None of the skeptical theories explained the flying object seen by both soldiers, nor did they explain the matching sightings from civilians along the coast. Today, Fort Itaipu still stands, partly preserved, partly in use as a training ground for Brazil's Coastal Artillery Corps. There is no plaque, no mention of what happened on that strange night in 1957. But in the files of UFO researchers and military historians, the case remains active, a rare example of physical harm caused by a UFO, officially acknowledged and never disproven. The victims, Ferrer and Dilva, eventually recovered, but both men left the service soon after. Neither ever gave a public interview. Their silence was complete, but their scars remained. More than 60 years later, the questions still burn. What hovered above Fort Itaipu? Why did it target 2 soldiers? And why, even now, is there so little willingness to face what really happened? The night was quiet. The light was blinding, and something not human, not known, visited a military base and left 2 men burned by a force science still can't explain. The Belgian Triangle Wave, 1989-1990, Belgium. The phone lines at the Eupen police station lit up just after 5 p.m., one call after another, drivers pulling over on the E40 motorway, farmers staring from frost-covered fields, an elderly woman from Henri Chapelle who refused to leave her window, whispering into the phone, "It's floating just above the trees, a black triangle, no sound." The dispatcher on duty thought it was a prank at first. Then another line rang, and another. By 5:15 p.m., a patrol car had been sent. Inside were officers Gendarme Heinrich Nicola and Hubert von Montigny, heading toward the outskirts of Eupen, near the German border. What they would see over the next 90 minutes would not only defy their expectations, it would make headlines around the world. That evening, November 29th, 1989, marked the start of what became known as the Belgian UFO wave, a 5-month span during which thousands of citizens, police, air traffic controllers, and military staff witnessed silent, low-flying black triangular craft that broke the laws of physics. It remains the most well-documented mass UFO sighting in European history, and to this day, no one knows what flew over Belgium. It started quietly. For days before the first big wave, villagers in Liège province had reported strange lights in the sky. Most were dismissed as stars or planes. But the events of November 29th changed everything. That night, Officer Nicola and his partner followed witness calls toward the Lake Gile area. There, they saw it. A large black triangular object with bright lights at each corner and a red pulsing light in the center. It hovered silently just above the tree line, then drifted slowly, deliberately, across the sky. No engine noise, no turbulence, just a dark, geometric shape cutting across the stars. At one point, the object made a sharp turn and sped out of view in total silence. The officers froze, unsure whether to call for backup or report what they had just seen. Later, they gave official testimony, and their accounts were matched with dozens of civilian reports from that same night, all describing the same thing: a giant dark triangle the size of a football field, flying impossibly slow and low, without a sound. The incident quickly drew national media attention. Unlike other UFO waves that were easy to dismiss due to poor evidence or untrained witnesses, the Belgian sightings involved police, pilots, radar technicians, and soldiers. Even skeptics couldn't ignore it. In the weeks that followed, the number of reports exploded. Between November 1989 and April 1990, more than 2,000 formal UFO reports were filed across Belgium. Most shared the same details: black triangular craft, 3 white lights at the corners, 1 red in the center, low altitude, silent flight, slow movement, and sudden acceleration. The sightings clustered around Wallonia, the French-speaking region, especially near Liège, Namur, and Wavre. Reports came in from small towns and big cities alike. Unlike the chaos of past UFO waves, this one was organized, deliberate, and massive. The Belgian Air Force took the reports seriously. In March 1990, after weeks of public pressure, the military began tracking the objects on radar. On the night of March 30-31, a breakthrough occurred. 2 F-16 fighter jets scrambled from Beauve-Chan Air Base to chase a triangle-shaped craft spotted over Glan's radar station. The jets locked on with radar, and then the object did something no known aircraft could do. It dropped from 10,000 feet to 1,000 feet in under 5 seconds. Impossible for any plane or helicopter, especially without a sonic boom. Radar operators watched as it zigzagged, disappeared, then reappeared elsewhere in seconds. The pilots lost visual contact. The object was gone, but the radar logs remained. Colonel Wilfried de Brouwer, then Chief of Operations for the Belgian Air Force, went public. On live TV, he confirmed that unknown craft had been tracked by both ground and airborne radar. He made clear these were not NATO or Belgian aircraft. Their origin was unknown. In an unprecedented move, the Air Force released radar data to civilian UFO research groups. SOBEPS, Société Belge d'études des phénomènes spatiaux, was given full access to the case files. For the first time in modern history, a national military openly worked with civilian UFO investigators. One of the most famous pieces of evidence came from a man named Patrick M., who in April 1990 photographed a black triangle hovering above a field in Petit-Rachin. The image, showing a triangle with bright corner lights and a glowing red center, was published worldwide. Years later, in 2011, someone claiming to be the photographer said it was a hoax. Still, even without that photo, the case remained strong. Radar proof, eyewitness testimony, and flight behavior beyond any known aircraft. Theories spread. Some thought the triangles were secret NATO or US stealth craft being tested at night. But no stealth plane, then or now, can hover silently, crawl forward, then instantly speed away without sound. Belgium's small airspace is tightly monitored, and NATO denied any such flights. Others suggested extraterrestrial origin. The triangle craft acted with purpose. They appeared over power plants, military bases, and villages. They seemed to want to be seen, but never attacked. Skeptics suggested stars, balloons, or mass hysteria, but those claims fell apart. Stars don't move sideways across the sky. balloons don't appear as black triangles, and hysteria doesn't create radar tracks or trained pilots reporting impossible speeds. The Belgian government never gave an official explanation, but they also never denied the events. Colonel de Brouwer, who later became respected in UFO research, said many times, "The Belgian UFO wave was real. Unknown objects were in our skies. They showed flight abilities beyond our technology. We still don't know who or what they were." Today, the Belgian Triangle Wave is seen as a landmark case. Unlike Roswell or Rendlesham, this wave unfolded calmly over months, with thousands of witnesses and open military cooperation. It became a model of how governments could, and perhaps should, respond to aerial mysteries. The official files remain open. The questions remain. And in the memories of police, pilots, radar staff, and everyday citizens is the vision of something impossible. A silent black triangle floating above their homes, as real as the ground beneath their feet. At the Tuscumbia Lights, 2006, Tuscumbia, Alabama, USA. The video began like any other small-town home recording, grainy, shaky, with the faint sound of cicadas in the background. But the lights didn't blink. 3 glowing red-orange lights hovered in a perfect triangle above the trees behind the Carter family home. One light drifted slowly to the left, stopped suddenly, then moved back into place. Another dipped closer to the ground, lighting up the branches of a tall pine before rising again, as if scanning. It was eerie, silent, unlike any plane they had seen before. 15-year-old Megan Carter stood behind the camera, whispering to her father, "It's not moving like a plane. It's just there." Her father, Doug, had served in the U.S. Air Force for 6 years. He knew what planes looked and sounded like. These weren't planes. That night, July 10th, 2006, was only the beginning. Over the next week, the town of Tuscumbia, Alabama, became the unlikely center of one of the most compelling but least publicized UFO waves in the American South. And while it never hit national news, the Carter family's video is still shared by researchers and online communities. Tuscumbia is a quiet town in northwest Alabama, near the Tennessee River. It's the kind of place where people leave doors unlocked, and the biggest yearly event is the Helen Keller Festival. It's not known for UFO sightings, but something hovered there in July 2006, and it didn't act like anything from Earth. After the Carter video was posted to YouTube, it quickly drew attention, not just from curious viewers, but from researchers and skeptics too. The footage was shaky but powerful. It showed objects hovering low above the tree line for over 10 minutes. They moved on their own, yet stayed in formation. No blinking aircraft lights, no jet sounds, no explanation. Local TV covered the clip, interviewing the Carters. Doug Carter said clearly, "I've worked around aircraft. These weren't jets. They weren't helicopters. I don't know what they were, but they weren't ours." Neighbors backed them up. A couple 2 blocks away saw the lights that same night. A retired teacher reported seeing glowing dots like embers floating above the trees. A sheriff's deputy, who stayed anonymous, said he saw something big and low in the sky that night. His police radio crackled with interference until the lights disappeared. Then it worked fine again. A few days later, 2 fishermen on the Tennessee River saw a similar triangle of lights hovering over the water. When they tried to take a photo, it came out blurry. By week's end, over a dozen reports came from across Colbert and Lauderdale counties. Some were even logged with MUFON, the Mutual UFO Network. What made the Tuscumbia sightings stand out was the mix of things. Consistent reports, video proof, multiple witnesses, a veteran noting interference, and no military or weather explanation. Investigators from MUFON and independent groups visited within 2 weeks. They interviewed the Carters and studied the original video. Experts noted the lights didn't match FAA aircraft signals. Radar logs obtained through FOIA showed no planes in the area that night. Weather balloons and drones were ruled out. Engineer Ray McCarty analyzed the video frame by frame. He found the lights kept the same geometric spacing, suggesting they were part of one solid object, or a perfectly coordinated group. He said, "If that's a single craft, it's enormous, quiet, and able to hover almost perfectly still. That's not anything I've ever seen fly." Local military bases denied having any exercises that night. When shown the video, one spokesperson simply said, "That does not appear to be any of our aircraft." Doug Carter later said 2 men, claiming to be from a government aviation office, visited his home asking to see the original tape. They never gave ID, never left a card, and only asked questions about where it was filmed. He said, "It felt odd, to be honest." The story never spread far. Major papers ignored it. The video got some attention on early YouTube, but was soon buried by other viral clips. For the Carters, it became a quiet mystery, something unforgettable, but overlooked by the wider world. Years later, Megan Carter, now in her 20s, said in an interview, "It wasn't just lights in the sky. It was something we all felt. The air changed. Time felt slower. You could feel it watching." Her father agreed, "I don't know what it was, but I know what it wasn't." And that's enough. Even now, researchers revisit the Tuscumbia lights as a credible, unexplained case. Clear video, consistent witnesses, experienced observers, electronic interference, and no ordinary explanation. The Carters still have the original footage, now digitized and backed up. It's not flashy. It doesn't show aliens, but its power lies in its simplicity. 3 lights hovering quietly, moving in ways no known aircraft can. But for those who saw it, the memory stayed. Megan Carter went on to college, then work, then family, but she still remembers that night clearly. "It's not something I think about every day," she said years later. "But sometimes I'll see a plane in the sky and feel my heart skip, because I know what I saw, and I know that wasn't a plane." Doug Carter still keeps the original tape stored safely, now digitized and backed up. Sometimes a researcher asks about it. Sometimes someone from town asks to see it again. And every time Doug watches their faces, how quiet they get, how long they stare at those 3 red lights. Most people moved on. Tuscumbia fell back into its calm rhythm. But for a few summer nights in 2006, something hovered in the dark. Something that didn't belong to any known program, didn't match any familiar shape, and didn't make a sound. Whether it was a visitor, a test, or something stranger, no one can say. But in the stillness of a southern night, with crickets chirping and the trees moving gently in the breeze, the sky once held a mystery, and the people of Tuscumbia were there to see it. The Chicago O'Hare Gate C-17 sighting, November 7th, 2006, Chicago O'Hare International Airport, Illinois, USA. It was a cold, gray afternoon at one of the busiest airports in the world. On November 7th, 2006, the tarmac at Chicago's O'Hare International buzzed with routine. Jet engines roared, ground crews hurried in bright vests, and runways shone with early winter drizzle. Flights were arriving and leaving without delay, but something strange was hovering just above Gate C-17. At first, only a few airport workers noticed. A mechanic walking under a United Airlines jet looked up and froze. Above Concourse C, in a patch of cloudy sky, a perfectly round metallic object was just sitting there, still, silent, and seemingly watching. No lights, no sound, no wings. It was not an aircraft, at least not any kind they'd ever seen. The mechanic quickly radioed his bosses. Word spread fast among United workers. Pilots, ramp workers, and gate agents all began to stare upward. Some gasped, some pointed. One ramp worker later described it as a gray-silver disc, clearly a disc, hovering quietly right over their gate. The object stayed in place just below the cloud ceiling, estimated at about 1900 ft. Then, without warning, it shot upward through the clouds with such speed and force that it left a visible hole in the thick cloud layer. Witnesses said it looked like a circular cutout had been made in the sky, showing a patch of clear blue above the gray. The hole stayed for several minutes before slowly closing with drifting vapor. In total, at least 12 United Airlines employees reported seeing the object. The event lasted about 5 minutes. Not one passenger saw it, at least not anyone who came forward. The sighting was limited to airline and ground crew workers with a clear view of the sky near gate C-17. At first, the incident was discussed only within United Airlines, but by the next day, the story spread. Employees began contacting the National UFO Reporting Center, NUFORC, and later, the Mutual UFO Network, MUFON. Rumors spread within aviation circles. The FAA's response was quick and dismissive. Spokesperson Elizabeth Isham Corey told the press that the FAA had no record of any unusual object in the area and had received no radar confirmation. The official explanation? A weather phenomenon. But that didn't sit well with the witnesses. John Hilkovich, a transportation reporter at the Chicago Tribune, heard about the story through a United source and began digging. His report, published 2 months later in early January 2007, spread through national media. The article was careful and detailed. It quoted several anonymous witnesses, United Airlines employees, and highlighted the FAA's refusal to investigate. "It's not like this is something the employees are making up," Hilkovich told CNN. "They're very believable, and they're all very consistent in what they saw." The report revealed that a United Airlines manager had filed an internal safety report about the incident shortly after it happened. Employees said they were told not to discuss the sighting in public. One pilot who saw the object from the cockpit was not allowed to speak to the press, but later confirmed the sighting anonymously to MUFON investigators. To many, the credibility of the witnesses made this case stand out. These were aviation professionals, people who spent their lives identifying aircraft, monitoring flight paths, and following strict rules. These weren't average UFO fans. They were trained observers on duty in one of the most controlled environments on Earth. Despite repeated Freedom of Information Act (FOIA) requests, the FAA first refused to release records about the incident, but continued pressure from investigative journalist Leslie Kean and others eventually forced the FAA to release air traffic audio recordings and internal emails. While the radar log showed no unusual activity, the email chains between United and FAA officials told a different story. Employees at both agencies had taken the sighting seriously, at least at first. One internal FAA email dated November 8th read, "United Airlines ramp employee spotted a spinning disc-shaped object approximately 700 ft above gate C-17. Object was reported to be completely silent and disappeared vertically at high speed." Other emails joked nervously about the event, with one FAA manager writing, "Do we really want to deal with this?" Another joked, "We're going to need an alien ID badge if this keeps up." The FAA stuck to its stance. No radar evidence, no investigation. They blamed it on a hole punch cloud, a weather effect where falling ice crystals create a clearing in the cloud cover. But meteorologists who looked at the case quickly disagreed. A hole punch cloud usually forms slowly, not suddenly, and is often seen with ice crystals and rainbow-like effects, none of which were reported that day. And it didn't explain a disk hovering for several minutes before creating the hole. Skeptics suggested other theories: an experimental drone, a mistaken balloon, or a strange optical illusion. But none matched the behavior, shape, or sudden movement of the object described by witnesses. Also, no military or private group came forward to claim responsibility for anything in the area at that time. This sighting became especially notable in UFO research because it happened in restricted airspace directly over an international airport, an area closely monitored and controlled. Any unknown object hovering near the terminal should have triggered security steps, FAA alerts, or even a military response. Yet no such response happened, and no clear explanation was given. The credibility of the witnesses, along with the FAA's unwillingness to investigate, led many to suspect a quiet cover-up or at least intentional ignorance. Aviation rules are clear. Unknown objects in controlled airspace are a possible safety threat and should be logged and reviewed. But in this case, the agencies dismissed the event without even recording it as an official incident. Over the years, the O'Hare case has become one of the most often cited examples of believable professional witnesses seeing a UFO in daylight at a major airport. It has been featured in documentaries, books, and aviation meetings. The incident was even discussed later during public hearings on UAPs, unidentified aerial phenomena, where pilots and officials used it as an example of the need for better reporting. To this day, none of the United employees who went on record have changed their stories. Most refused more interviews, choosing to let the facts speak for themselves. A few retired and later spoke more freely. One ramp worker, speaking under the fake name Joe R., recalled in a podcast, "It was there. I saw it. Everyone around me saw it. We weren't imagining it. It was right over gate C-17, as real as the planes we load every day. And then it was gone." The circular hole in the clouds, the one left when the object shot upward, was also seen by passengers in nearby planes. A United pilot reported it to the tower, puzzled by the perfect clearing. Weather records from that day showed no natural causes for a sudden break in cloud cover. FAA radar detected nothing unusual, or at least that's what the public was told. In later years, attempts were made to recreate the sighting with computer graphics to test whether it could have been a hoax, but none captured the same precision and silence described. Today at O'Hare, travelers walk past gate C-17 with no idea that above that very spot on a cold afternoon in 2006, something hovered beyond known physics, watched silently by a dozen experienced professionals who never forgot what they saw. Whether it was a drone, an experimental craft, or something not of this world remains a mystery. But in the busy chaos of one of America's largest airports, with radio chatter and glass terminals, the sky briefly opened, silently, and something impossible flew away. The Stan Romanek Files, 2000s, Colorado, USA. It began with a knock on the window. Stan Romanek, a former pipe fitter and aspiring writer, was watching TV alone in his modest home in Colorado when he heard it. A tapping, rhythmic, deliberate. He paused, muted the television, and leaned toward the sound. Nothing. Then it came again. When he pulled back the curtain, he saw it. A figure, not tall, thin, with pale gray skin and large black almond-shaped eyes. It stood still just beyond the glass for no more than 2 seconds. Then, as quickly as it had appeared, it vanished. Romanek stumbled back, heart racing. He grabbed his camera, ran outside, but the yard was empty. Just silence under a moonless sky. What began as a strange and frightening moment would spiral into one of the most well-known and debated UFO abduction cases in modern history. Romanek claimed that this was only the beginning. In the early 2000s, Stan began experiencing what he described as ongoing and increasing contact with non-human beings. Lights in the sky, sudden blackouts, mysterious injuries, and missing time all became part of his daily life. But unlike most who report abductions, Romanek documented everything. He kept a detailed log of each incident: dates, times, symptoms. He set up cameras around his home. He installed motion sensors. He saved voicemails he claimed came from government agents. Romanek said he received messages in strange languages and symbols, sometimes written in his own handwriting, even though he had no memory of doing so. And then came the math. One of the most puzzling parts of Romanek's story involved what he called downloads, sudden bursts of uncontrollable writing filled with complex math equations and geometric diagrams. At least 2 physicists later reviewed some of these formulas and confirmed they matched advanced concepts in gravitational physics, concepts Romanek had no known training to produce. He also claimed to have a lasting injury, damaged cartilage in his shoulder, after being violently pulled from his bed and dropped back onto it. The injury, confirmed by medical records, confused doctors because of how sudden and severe it was. In one especially disturbing incident, Stan filmed what he later called the Boo video. Using a handheld camera, he recorded himself reacting to strange noises near his window. In the footage, a small gray face quickly peeks into view before darting away. The video, once made public, became one of the most talked about alleged alien recordings in UFO circles. Skeptics called it a hoax, but others found it too unsettling and too perfectly timed to dismiss. What made Romanek's case stand out was the sheer amount and variety of alleged evidence. Over nearly a decade, he collected photos of strange lights in the sky over Colorado and Nebraska, video recordings of unusual craft hovering near his home, reports of electronic interference and mysterious power surges, phone calls with synthetic mechanical voices warning him to stop talking publicly, accounts of unmarked black vans parked outside his house for days at a time, eyewitness statements from family and neighbors who confirmed seeing strange lights and figures near his property. One of the creepiest clips came from a home surveillance camera showing Romanek appearing to levitate out of bed, his body rising several inches off the mattress before dropping back down. In 2003, during a live appearance on NBC's The Jane Pauley Show, Romanek collapsed on set after retelling his experiences. Backstage footage showed him confused, sweating, and struggling to regain awareness. But as attention grew, so did criticism. Skeptics dug deep into Romanek's background and methods. Some pointed out that the alien voices on his voicemail could easily be made with voice software. Others argued the Boo video could have been faked with a puppet and lighting tricks. Several UFO researchers who once supported him eventually pulled away, citing contradictions in his interviews and possible exaggerations. One even suggested Romanek had too much evidence, that the sheer amount made it less believable, not more. Still, defenders pointed to the complexity of his records, arguing no single person could create such an elaborate mix of physical, audio, and video evidence without help or motive. In 2009, Romanek took a polygraph test for a documentary. The results were inconclusive. When asked if he faked alien contact, his answers showed signs of lying. But Romanek said the stress of the test and threats he received before the interview affected the outcome. Then things turned darker. In 2014, police searched Romanek's home. He was later charged with possession of child pornography. The trial gained national attention and divided public opinion. Romanek pleaded not guilty, insisting the files had been planted by government agents as punishment for his UFO claims. His computer had reportedly been hacked before, and Romanek claimed malware was used to remotely upload illegal files without his knowledge. However, in 2017, a jury convicted him. He received 2 years of strict probation and had to register as a sex offender. The conviction destroyed almost all mainstream support for his UFO claims. Even longtime supporters struggled to reconcile the man who said he was in contact with aliens and the man convicted of such a crime. Yet, some of the earlier evidence still troubles researchers. For example, independent physicists confirmed Romanek's handwritten math included correct formulas about gravitational lensing and energy flow, topics he had no training in. One recorded phone call included a digital voice saying, "You have been told not to speak." Forensic audio analysis showed the signal was routed through a complex masking system and originated outside the U.S. Romanek's then-wife and others confirmed seeing lights in the sky and strange electronic malfunctions. Several incidents of missing time were documented, including one where Romanek was found barefoot, miles from home, in freezing temperatures, confused and with no memory of how he got there. To some, Stan Romanek is a fraud who exploited the UFO community for fame and money. To others, he's a tragic figure, possibly unstable, possibly manipulated, who may have experienced something real but lost credibility due to his later crimes. The files he left behind, hundreds of hours of video, piles of notes, medical records, and first-hand testimonies, remain a tangled mix of fact, fiction, and mystery. Researchers have tried to separate the man from the phenomena, but few have succeeded. Today, Romanek lives in relative obscurity. Most UFO documentaries avoid his case, calling it too controversial. Yet the footage remains. The equations remain. The unexplained lights captured by multiple witnesses remain. What do we make of a man who may have recorded one of the most detailed alien contact cases in history, only to lose credibility, whether by his own choices or by a carefully orchestrated takedown? In the end, the Romanek case may not be about belief. It may be about the limits of trust. How far we're willing to go when faced with overwhelming evidence tarnished by one fatal flaw, and how easily truth can vanish when its messenger collapses under the weight of it. The Portage County Police Chase, April 17, 1966, Portage County, Ohio, USA. The radio crackled in the early morning. All units, report status. Deputy Sheriff Dale Spar rubbed his eyes. He and his partner, Wilbur Barney Neff, had just finished checking an abandoned car along Route 224 near Ravenna, Ohio. The woods around them were still dark, the April air chilled with frost. Birds had not yet stirred. Spar stepped away from the cruiser to inspect the car's open trunk when something caught his eye, a bright white light through the trees. At first, he thought it was the sun rising, but the light was moving, drifting upward from the forest into the sky. Seconds later, the object revealed itself fully, a huge metallic oval-shaped craft, glowing intensely, with a domed top and wide flat bottom. It hovered silently, about 100 feet above the tree line. No sound, no smoke, just light. Neff stepped out and saw it too. Spar radioed dispatch. "There's something in the sky, we're going to follow it." And they did. What began as a routine patrol became one of the most famous UFO chases in U.S. history, lasting 85 miles, crossing into Pennsylvania, involving multiple police cars, and ending in media chaos. The craft moved just ahead of them, sometimes climbing higher, then dropping lower. Unlike a plane or helicopter, it made no sound and had no navigation lights, Whenever they gained on it, it sped up. When they stopped, it hovered. It led them past towns like Atwater, Randolph, and Alliance. Other police officers joined the chase. Frank Panzanella, an East Palestine officer, also saw it. A civilian photographer reportedly took pictures, though those later disappeared. At one point, the craft shot upward at incredible speed, paused, then descended again, almost like it was playing with them. As they neared the state line, their radios filled with static. The object's glow never dimmed. Finally, near Conway, Pennsylvania, after nearly 90 minutes, the craft shot straight up into the atmosphere and vanished. The chase made national headlines. Police chase flying saucer 85 miles. Reporters swarmed. TV crews demanded interviews. The Air Force sent investigators from Project Blue Book, its official UFO program. But Spauer later said they seemed more interested in discrediting him than finding the truth. The official explanation? A satellite, or Venus. The case was marked solved. But no one who was there accepted that. Venus doesn't hover above trees, match a police car's speed, or shine beams of light into forests. Spauer went public, calling the explanation an insult, but the backlash ruined his life. He became paranoid, withdrawn, and eventually divorced. Neff too faded from public life. Decades later, researchers revisited the case. Stunned at the amount of evidence, radio logs, witness statements from multiple jurisdictions, consistent reports. Spauer told one journalist, "It ruined my life. All I did was see something I couldn't explain." The case became a staple in UFO history and even inspired Steven Spielberg's Close Encounters of the Third Kind. Though skeptics suggested misidentified aircraft or natural phenomena, Spauer and Neff never retracted their story. The dispatch tapes and Blue Book files still exist, describing them as calm and reliable officers. To this day, the object has never been identified. It was not Venus, not a balloon, not a prank. What it was is still unknown, but it changed lives. Dale Spauer died in 1983. He never recanted. His file remains buried among thousands of declassified reports, often overlooked, but for those who read it, it stands as one of the strongest UFO cases on record. What do you do when the impossible flies just ahead of you, taunting your pursuit, seen by many, but denied by those in power? For Spauer, the answer was simple. Follow it as long as he could. And that chase, though long over, still echoes down the back roads of history.